The story begins with a huge praying mantis looking out from behind the bushes at a running boar. It quickly jumped forward and stuck its foot into the animal's body, biting off a piece of it. Master Lu pointed his weapon forward and quickly ran towards the monster, and loudly said for everyone to run here. The heavenly knights stood on the body of the slain praying mantis with smiles. The master raised his hand and loudly said that they had finally destroyed the S-class monster, the giant praying mantis. At the same time, the people raised their hands high, watching them through the screen, and loudly said that this was what they expected from the heavenly knights. Lin Tian, holding the documents in his hand, raised his glasses with his other hand and said that the game was finally balanced. This game is large scale, but unlike other games, it recreates the entire world. 20 years ago, countless portals suddenly appeared all over the world. They lead to worlds teeming with various creatures. They were called jungles. After a series of studies of these worlds, people found out that the jungle, although dangerous, but they cannot interact with their world. In other words, neither magic items nor the power obtained in the jungle can pass through the portal. The most interesting thing is that the Xinchuan Technology Company claimed its rights to the jungle. Using technology, they turned the worlds into an interactive game called Survival and the Apocalypse. In the game, the player who passed through the portal becomes a knight who must survive in this world. However, players can die in the jungle, so this game is played by those who are bored with ordinary life. They come there to experience something new. Now, most of the Earth's population has already visited other worlds. Some rich people even hired brave men to live in another world. This is no longer a game, but a whole work of art. And he, the main character, is one of its creators. Lu Delong, the child of a high-ranking executive of the Xinchuan Technology Company. He is also a high-level warrior in the game. Delong quickly walked into the office holding a piece of paper in his hand. He sternly threw the paper towards Tian and asked why the mantis monster's data was changed. Perhaps the protagonist did this? Delong arrogantly adjusted his collar with his hand and said that this adjustment was not approved by the management. Who gave the permission? Tian calmly adjusted his glasses and said that this is all for the sake of game balance. The values he initially set are different from the current ones. Because of this, the game may become uncontrollable. Delong angrily grabbed the protagonist by the shirt and asked since when does he dictate the rules here? Tian must remember that only the company can give any instructions. The protagonist only has to follow them. Tian angrily threw his hand away and said that he is responsible for all game content. He has already changed the monster's parameters, and if the original data is returned, everything will stop working. Delong turned to the side with anger and said loudly that in that case they should fix everything now. He wants to see the results he strives for. No one will leave here until Delong gets them. The man looked away and said he told him not to make edits and just listen to his superiors. Lu gritted her teeth and asked loudly, does this man seriously think that he is the boss here? He only added work for them. Delong said with confidence that if he is against it, he can write a letter of resignation. Tian looked down with a stern look and thought that these people have no goal, to make a game that everyone will like. If the protagonist continues to work here. Luo Yu extended her hand to his hand and loudly addressed the boss. She looked at him with a sad look and told him not to be so angry. The protagonist turned to Luo with a serious look and said that in fact, he is millions of dollars in debt. Tian is afraid that if he loses this job, the debt collectors will beat him up and leave him to die on the streets. He realized something and asked, is it even safe to stay here? He needs to think it over. Delong looked back with a serious face and said loudly that Tian should be aware of his role. He should only do what is asked of him, and not the other way around. After some time, Luo, with a smile on her face, sitting on a bench with a laptop on her lap, turned to her boss and thanked him for his advice. She finally understood what the problem was. Tian pointed his finger at the laptop and said that there was nothing wrong with her design. He just made a few edits. Luo, with a red face, looked at him and told him not to say that. If it weren't for his help, she would not have been able to last in the company. Luo is very grateful to him. She sadly put her hand on the laptop and looking down said that the way the protagonist argues with the management makes her sad. Luo is worried that they will do something bad to him. There were rumors that their company used the jungle to get rid of competitors. It is very dangerous to mess with them. Tian calmly looked down and said that he would somehow figure it out. Luo happily stood up in front of him quickly holding a laptop in her hands and loudly said that this is great. It is good that he understands everything. Then she will go back to work. The protagonist looked at her with admiration and thought that Luo is the only one in the company with whom he can talk. She is his only ray of light in this gloomy world. Tian cannot just let her go, and he loudly called out to her. Luo, with a smile on her face, turned to the side and, turning to the boss, asked what he needed. The protagonist extended his hand towards her and loudly said that this company and even perhaps the whole world are waiting for big changes. Tian loudly told Luo to take care of herself, and she turned to him with a puzzled look. He confidently clenched his fist and told her not to worry. Tian would do everything in his power to protect her. Luo quickly approached him and kissed him on the cheek. She raised her hand with a red face and said loudly that she believed in him and was sure that Tian could do it. The protagonist thought that the secret of this company that he accidentally discovered, which could change the whole world, only reminded him. Leaving the company would not only lead to the fact that he would be pursued by debt collectors, but also that it would be easier for the company to kill him. Tian was in a situation that he could not get out of. Sooner or later, they would start acting and he needed to be prepared. After some time, several people appeared on the screen at a round table in the room. The old man said that everyone had gathered and then the 76th meeting of the Xinchuan project officially began. He said with a stern look that the Red Department had discovered that the jungle was expanding. The old man was afraid that they were close to something important. There was still no sign of the jungle lord they wanted. Dalong, with a serious expression, leaning his face on his hand, said that Tian, who was in charge of developing the game, kept rejecting their proposed ideas. He felt like the protagonist might have seen something. Luo calmly agreed with him and said that he already knew about the secret of the jungle. The man looked at her and said that it was a secret that could completely change the world. People like him should not know about it. They needed to kill him before he had time to prepare. The old man who appeared in front of them said that he remembered his name. Tian was a very talented developer, and in order to get him to work for their company, they had to go to great lengths. They even dragged his family into huge debts. The old man turned to Dalong and said that it was his idea. Since the protagonist had become a problem for them, let his knights take care of him. The old man loudly told them to just kill him in the jungle. Dalong folded his arms with a malicious grin and said that he had been waiting for this day for a long time. After some time, a powerful explosion in the jungle among the trees filled the area with smoke. Dalong looked at Tian and Luo and said, what a weak couple they were. He never thought that the protagonist would use his game privileges to collect such equipment. To think that Tian had defeated so many of his knights. Dalong said loudly with a grin on his face that if it weren't for Luo, who was shining at every step, it would not have been easy for him to find him. When did the protagonist start preparing for this? Was it really after he found out about the secret? He raised his bloody sword with a serious look and asked, or did Tian assume from the very beginning that sooner or later they would get rid of him? Dalong said with an ominous grin on his face that it no longer mattered. He quickly stood behind the protagonist with a terrifying look. Tian fell to the ground with a peaceful expression and said, why is she? 10 years ago, after a study by the Xinchuan Technology Company, the jungle was determined to be beyond the real world. Humans could peacefully coexist with them, but the jungle is growing unnoticed. In 10 years, it could swallow the earth, meaning that in the future, all of humanity will have to survive in the jungle. Tian, a game designer responsible for preventing the jungle from becoming a game suitable for humans. Although the higher-ups tried their best to hide the true state of affairs, he still found out about their plan. The protagonist knew and understood that sooner or later they would silence him. So he began to prepare in advance. Everything was going as Tian wanted, but he could not even imagine that the only person he trusted would betray him. Lo calmly placed her hand on her waist and asked, did he still not understand? From the very beginning, the protagonist's life was clearly planned. From the death of his parents to the huge debt of the company. Luo, with a smirk on her face, said that it was all thanks to his amazing talent for developing games. The company had to develop a plan, and she was only the last guarantor of this plan. So if Tian wants to blame her, she can do it. Luo sat down with a haughty smile and looked at the lying protagonist, and said that he was an outstanding person. Tian looked down with longing and said, why her? Dalong, wiping the weapons in his hands from blood, interrupted him and said that they should stop talking. Their mission is simply to kill him, although apparently they will have to do it themselves. He looked back with a sly grin on his face, and said that they will just leave him here. Dalong, entering the portal, said that Tian should be eaten by the monsters he himself created. The monsters gathered together and looked down. The system window notifies that a threat to the life of the owner has been detected, and the jungle system is activated. Identification of the Lord of the Jungle is in progress, and the download is completed successfully. Monster Alien Mantis and his active skill Flash, passive skill Jungle Instinct. A powerful beam of energy quickly hit the ground, creating streams of smoke. Tian looked forward, assessing the space around him with his eyes, and wondered if it really worked. He moved his clawed hand and thought that it really worked. It seems that he managed to mislead the company's management. Did they really think that armor was his only trump card? The protagonist, with a grin on his face, turned into a monster and thought that this was his real trump card. Research has shown that originally a powerful creature, the Lord of the Jungle, lived in the jungle. Despite the fact that he disappeared long ago, there is documentary evidence showing how much all races feared him. Tian fell into memories of the past. Luo, pointing at the screen, said that according to research, when high-class creatures die in the jungle, their energy continues to exist in one form or another. Dalong looked at the screen and said that this is a potential danger to survival in the apocalypse. He said with a serious expression that he will find a solution to this problem. He will find all the threats and completely eliminate them as soon as possible. The protagonist adjusted his glasses with his finger and said that there is currently no information about this. If something is found, he will provide a report. Tian came out of his memories with a grin on his face. He raised his clawed hand and thought that this is the real path that he has been saving for himself. The power of the Lord of the Jungle that they have been looking for so long, and something that matches this power. The system window notifies that his system mission is survival. His presence has attracted the attention of the jungle monsters. The protagonist is about to be attacked, and his task is to survive the hunt of the jungle monsters. The reward for completing this task is 1,000 jungle points. Tian, looking at the system window, thought that the enemies are already here. This is a dark forest, so the monsters that live here are spectral wolves. The protagonist, kneeling on all fours in front of the spectral wolf, quickly raised his wings. He thought with a confident grin that this was all thanks to the passive skill Jungle Instinct. He can sense someone else's presence and react quickly. The spectral wolf is a low-level monster that lives in the jungle. It has average combat strength, and they usually like to hunt in packs. Tian looked at the standing wolves with a grin on his face and thought that fortunately, these are low-level monsters. He can easily deal with them. The protagonist also has offensive skills. He pointed his hand forward and quickly jumped forward using the Flash skill. Jungle Instinct doubled his senses, and Flash increased his mobility. This combination turned out to be very successful in combination with his knowledge of the jungle. Tian grabbed the tree with his nails and quickly looked at the wolves running below. The wolf, quickly running forward, stepped on the leaves of a plant on the ground. He opened his mouth wide and looked at the man-eating flower that had emerged from the ground. This flower remains in a state of deep sleep without external influence. If they step on it, it will be very difficult to get out. Tian flew forward and pierced the body of the wolf that was swallowed by the man-eating flower with his claws. The protagonist crouched down, raised his hand to his face and thought that it was not that difficult to deal with them. He thought that this was all and that his stamina was almost exhausted. Tian had already advanced to the 3rd level. He quickly found himself ahead of the wolf corpses. The protagonist, wiping his face from the blood with his finger, thought that he felt more at home in the jungle than in human society. The system had not yet notified him of the completion of the mission. Is there really anyone else left? A huge spectral wolf with a bright fire on its head quickly appeared above his head. The system window notified that this was a spectral wolf leader of the 6th level. Tian looked at the wolf leader and thought that from what he remembered, the probability of a low-level lord monster appearing here was less than 1%. He couldn't believe that he had encountered one. The protagonist was surprised to think that the level difference between them was so great that he could feel the pressure just by standing here. The leader ran at him furiously, exhaling streams of air. The protagonist jumped to the side, crouched down, leaning on his hand, and thought that his stamina was almost at its limit. The lord with a fiery aura in his eyes quickly pounced on the protagonist, leaving scars on his chest. Tian turned his head to the side and thought that the leader was very fast. He gritted his teeth and fell onto the grass, clenching his hand into a fist. The lord, with an angry look, headed towards him, scratching the ground with his nails. He opened his mouth wide and quickly attacked the protagonist with his paw. Tian gritted his teeth and blocked his blow with his hands and wondered if he was really going to die here. This can't be, he can't die. The protagonist has survived all of the company's attempts to kill him. He must take revenge on those who manipulated his life, especially that woman, Luo. Tian remembered the past in which Luo approached him and said that she had studied the structure of the game. It seems that she still makes mistakes. The protagonist looked at her and asked how so. He confidently raised his finger and said that this is what makes the jungle so unique. It is not like the games they made in the past. Their system must take into account more possibilities than just following a set formula, because the jungle is alive. Tian returned from memories blocking the Lord's attack, thought that the jungle is alive. He cannot predict everything that will happen. Like Luo's betrayal and the sudden appearance of the leader of the spectral wolves. The protagonist bit a strand of hair with his teeth, thought that he will just do it. He must live, and this is the only way to get revenge. Tian quickly fell down under the pressure of the Lord's paw. He pushed the ground with his hand and moved forward and thought that he had to take revenge. The leader quickly jumped forward, tracking Tian's bloody trail. The protagonist gritted his teeth and moved forward, jumping from the trees. He thought that the leader of the 6th level spectral wolves had the ability to track by blood. It was impossible to avoid his surveillance by simply running away. Man-eating flowers, exploding berries, and toxic mushrooms. They were all useless and would not work against such a monster. What should he do in such a situation? Tian, flying forward, looked at the huge tree and wondered if this tree was really that big. Could this be it? There was a way out, and it was here. The protagonist, looking tired, landed on the tree, digging his claws into its bark. He looked down with a grin on his face. Tian thought that in this forest you could meet more than just spectral wolves. The system window notified that this was a 7th level stalagmite bear leader. The leader, with an angry look, burst out of the tree, creating powerful streams of smoke. The main character, with a grin on his face, quickly headed higher up the tree. He jumped onto a tree branch, leaning on it with his hand. Tian looked down at the alphas and thought that the fight was intense. He could finally breathe a sigh of relief. The stalagmite bear quickly opened the wolf's mouth with its paws. The protagonist thought that he needed to get away from here as soon as possible, while they were fighting each other. He looked at the system window that appeared with a puzzled expression. Tian pulled his legs up, placing his hands on them, and wondered if he would fail the mission if he escaped now. He was so focused on escaping that he almost forgot about the task. His presence attracted the attention of the jungle monsters. This stalagmite bear was provoked by his actions. He shouldn't be included in the mission, then only the spectral wolf alpha is left. The protagonist just needs to wait for a while. The stalagmite bear is level 7, he should definitely be stronger. Killing the spectral wolf alpha won't take long. After a while, the system window notifies that the mission is complete. The system congratulates him on completing the task. The skill panel is activated and the system reward is 1000 jungle points. His skills can be improved by jungle points. Tian looked at the system window and thought that his mission was completed as soon as the leader of the spectral wolves died. In addition to jungle points, the skill panel was activated. The system window notifies that there are general C-level skills. Poison, you can use poison when attacking, for 400 jungle points. Stealth, you can use the jungle environment to become invisible for 600 points. Flight skill, you can grow wings and fly at high speed for 600 points. Advanced C-level skills, the monsters will skill. You can activate the will of the jungle lord, then you can get power. This power is beyond his capabilities and you can intimidate other monsters. However, as the skill effect increases, the protagonist will gradually lose his own will. This is a risky skill and should be approached with caution. This skill costs 1000 jungle points. BA and S tier skills are inactive and the system store is not activated. His current jungle points are 1000. Tian thought that he should find a safe place and study this carefully. The protagonist ducked to the side in surprise from the bear running at him. He gritted his teeth and flew to the side and thought that he couldn't handle this guy now. He urgently needed to escape from here. Tian quickly headed forward, breaking trees under him. The protagonist flew forward through the jungle, pushing off and bouncing off the trees. He tensely clinging to the tree with his claws thought that this was a curse. This bear was not going to let him go. Tian couldn't take it anymore. One hit, and he was definitely finished. He was in bad shape, and it looked like he would have to choose one of these skills. The protagonist quickly looked at the system window that appeared. He thought that this bear was much more trouble than he thought. Poison attacks were unlikely to take him. Tian is afraid that escaping from him using stealth is impossible due to his earth attribute perception. Unfortunately, he only has enough points to activate 2 skills. The flight skill, although it is useless in a real battle, can help the protagonist escape now. This bear just cut off Tian's wings. It will take time to restore them, and it is obvious that in this situation, he will not be able to fly. The tree quickly broke in half under the pressure of attacks. The protagonist, gritting his teeth, jumped up from the breaking tree. He thought that as soon as his stamina runs out, he will definitely die. Tian can't do anything about it, and can only. The protagonist, without having time to think, click on the system window, choosing the monster will skill. The system window notifies that the training was successful and Tian has mastered the monster will skill. The protagonist quickly jumped up, raising his hand in front of him. He dealt a powerful blow to the bear and stood on the ground using a powerful flash. Tian, standing in front of the lying leader, thought that the problem was finally solved. He gritted his teeth, felt a strong pain and fell to his knees. The protagonist, with a tense look, put his hands on his head and wondered if this was the remnants of the consciousness of the Lord of the Jungle. Sometime later, at the Sichuan Technology Company, Dalong looked at the screen and said that they left Tian to die in the jungle. Now Lu will officially take this post and will be responsible for developing survival in the apocalypse. The man who appeared in the system window said that he hoped that she will not let them down. Is there any news about the Lord of the Jungle? Lu calmly said that past research has shown something. They showed that historically, high-level monsters in the jungle were called masters. They can be killed, but their will and strength remain the same. It will be inherited through something like reincarnation. At the same time, the heir runs the risk of submitting to the will of the monster. The man said that this means this power is quite dangerous. Luo agreed with him and said that if he does not have a more powerful spiritual power, he will be absorbed. Even if he is superior in physical strength. The man said with a serious look that in any case, if people want to enter the jungle, they must control their own forces. They must remember that for great risks there are good rewards, so they must do this. Luo bowed and said that she would definitely find the power of the Lord of the Jungle for the company. At the same time, loud sounds were heard in the jungle. Tian loudly asked, "Is this really the remaining consciousness of the Lord of the Jungle?" It is rushing into his mind, and if the protagonist loses, he may cease to be a man. Tian, gritting his teeth in pain, leaning his hands on the ground, walked through the powerful stream and said that he cannot lose. He must live to take revenge on them. The main character threw his body back and raised his hand, feeling severe pain. He raised his head up and screamed rapidly, creating air currents. Bright beams of energy flew into the sky, intertwining with each other. A powerful explosion created streams of light smoke. Tian changed his body to a human one and rubbed his face with his finger, saying that it finally happened. He got rid of the side effects. This skill has an amazing destructive power, but it causes great damage to the psyche. The main character looked down and said that even though this is a monster's body, it still has great human features, supporting the will of a person. Tian thinks that he needs to find a way to launch the Elena Butterfly Elves program in order to turn into a full-fledged monster in the future. Elena Butterfly Elves are a race of jungle elves. She is endowed with light abilities and has excellent support skills. Tian remembered the past. He said that they are not very powerful and have almost no effect on the game. Dalong leaned his face on his hand and said that besides entering their world, the Labyrinth Valley, was very dangerous. So why waste time on them? They have more important things to do. The protagonist said with a thoughtful look that there were very few creatures in the game that could serve as NPC guides. They were perfect for this role. Dalong said loudly with an angry look that this was not necessary. The old man who appeared in the system told them to stop arguing. Tian was responsible. It was up to him to decide this. Dalong had always been responsible for combat reconnaissance. So if he didn't want to, he could assign it to someone else. Dalong raised his hand with a calm look and said that then let Luo Feng from the second squad do it. He would really like this. Tian came out of his memories and looked around. He thought that the power of Elena's butterfly elves could enhance his spiritual power. If they successfully concluded the contract, then his monster will would have no limits. The protagonist kneeled down and thought that he had previously wanted to use the company's power to open the entrance to them. Now Elena's butterfly elf program had been handed over to Feng from the second squad. Tian looked up with a serious expression and thought that he was sorry. Dalong did not take this task seriously and refused. If he remembered correctly, one of the guys who often pestered him was in this same squad. If Tian wanted to deal with him, he needed to find abilities to unlock common skills. The protagonist calmly put his finger to the system window that appeared. The system window notified that his main mission was to protect the jungle. As the Lord of the Jungle, he must fulfill his duty. He needed to drive out outsiders and protect the various clans. This is a long-term quest, divided into several quests. The reward for completing it is activating the B-rank skill bar and unlocking monster mode. Tian's daily quest is to be friendly and help the weak mushroom clan. He needs to repair their fortifications and gain their favor. The reward for completing the task is 50 jungle points. There is a daily task to increase reputation. Become a mediator in the dispute between the spider lair and the cave of dry bones, in order to show the authority of the Lord of the Jungle. The reward for completing this task is 100 jungle points. Tian thoughtfully looked at the system window and thought that this time it was even divided into main and additional tasks. Some tasks are simple, but the rewards are so small. The rewards are based on the simplicity of the task. The greater the risk, the higher the reward. Unlocking monster mode as a reward for completing the main task sounds interesting. Still, first he will complete a couple of daily tasks. Then he will unlock a couple of vital skills. Tian helped the mushroom clan with their buildings and they invited him to try their food. In the spider lair, a spider woman pestered him. She seemed to want to do something wrong with the main character. Tian protected the bird eggs on the cliff, fighting off a poisonous snake, while a newly hatched buzzard chick was pecking at his head. After some time, the protagonist, looking tired, lying on the ground, extended his finger to the system window. He said that he finally got 700 points. He can unlock a new skill. Add poison, stealth or flight. Which of these will be better? Tian said loudly that a new task had appeared. He looked at the window that had appeared with a tense look, leaning his hand on the ground. The system window notifies that a task has appeared, hunting for strangers. He needs to drive the human race out of the jungle, in order to show his power as the Lord of the Jungle. The number of tasks is 10 out of 0, and the reward is 1,000 jungle points. Rewards will be given out in accordance with the completed volume. The reward for completing the activation of the store function. Tian extended his finger forward and said that this was hunting for strangers, which means players. The protagonist, with a grin on his face, changed his appearance to a praying mantis and said that this store function is very important. Then jungle points can be spent not only on skills. Now the main character decided to follow the path of the monster. He will eradicate everything human in himself. After some time, under the dark sky, among the dark clouds, there are mountains. The weapon quickly fell on the head of the orc lying on the ground. The leader with a sly smile on his face stood on the orc's head and loudly said that they were in the territory of the Elena butterfly elves. It is not as scary here as they say. The white-haired guy with a smile on his face said that this is just the entrance to the labyrinth. You can enter their territory only by getting to the center of the valley and getting the secret key. The leader with an ominous smile laughed and said that this is the world of ferns. A large tree stands under the dark sky, illuminating everything around with glowing balls. The white-haired guy said that the ad on the forum said something. If you open the way to the valley and get the secret key, you can get a big reward. The leader with a smile on his face raised his hand and said that he thought it would be difficult. He didn't expect that there would only be a couple of low-level monsters here. This time, they would be able to get a lot of things. Silver arrows flew forward swiftly. The players looked forward in fear. The goblins held bows in their hands with smiles on their faces and looked at them. The white-haired guy looked at the many orcs standing in front of them and thought that there were too many of them. The leader said loudly that they were goblins and they needed to defend themselves. The goblins quickly charged forward along the mountain. They raised a red flag and looked at the torn bodies of the players. The goblins surrounded themselves with fire and performed a dance of hellish fire. The goblin held a cloth in his hand and quickly looked to the side. The level 15 berserker Fong looked forward with a smile on his face. He said loudly that posting a reward quest on the forum worked. They finally killed all those goblins. A couple of amateur teams tried to take this S-class quest. They deserved to be used as bait. Fong raised his hand with a smirk on his face and said loudly that they would get rid of these monsters. Level 13 archer Sanjia drew a shatter arrow and shot it upwards above the goblins. Fong quickly raised his weapon with the intention of attacking. At the same time, Tian thought that using newbies as bait was a good strategy. The protagonist used the stealth skill while hiding behind a rock. He crouched down with a smile on his face and said that this was too low. Unfortunately, Tian was already too much like a monster to go into human cities. Otherwise, exterminating strangers would be much easier. But it was not his style to attack innocent bystanders. These guys were from the second team. The guys they hired for the second team did the same to the adventurers from the same company. Such sacrifices just for some resources. Tian recalled the situation from the past. Dalong crossed his arms and said that these were injuries incompatible with life as a result of an accident during an adventure. The protagonist said loudly with an angry look that he thought he knew who he hired. It was Foam. They were all real bandits. They went into the jungle to escape punishment for their crimes, and he gathered them into a squad for the expedition. Dalong waved his hand as he left and said that exploring the jungle was dangerous. People like Tian, sitting in the office at the computer, would not understand this. If the protagonist thought they were criminals, he could call the police. Tian, returning from the memories, looked ahead. He said that they were a bunch of freaks who participated in the siege and suppression of it. So the protagonist would not be burdened by anything if he had to kill them. The main thing is that they still have a big difference in strength. The leader of the group is Foam, a berserker of level 15, an archer Ching and a mage Sarah of level 13. They have others in their team, all around level 10. They are all criminals who will kill without thinking twice. Tian looked ahead and said that he had been following the fastest leveling strategy for the past few days. He was still only at level 10 anyway. Considering that the monster's will was out of the question, the protagonist was still a little wary of dealing with so many people. Tian stood on a tree branch and looked ahead. He said with a serious expression that fortunately, he had earned jungle points from past quests. The protagonist had unlocked the stealth function, so he could sneak up behind them and gradually plan everything out. In addition, he had been given more points for past daily quests. Tian used the stealth skill with a smile on his face and said loudly that the rest of the battle depended on him. A mushroom with a smile on his face quickly appeared on a tree branch and loudly said that he was a mushroom. After a while, the 12th level mage Sarah looked at her brother and asked how he was doing. The guy, emitting rays from his eyes, put his hands on his head and said that 70% of the area was in fog. His spirit pet can hardly see anything. Foam, with an angry look, sat on the goblin and put his hand on his leg and told him to calm down and study the fog. The guy said that if his spirit pet gets close to the valley, then monsters can get it. The leader, with a terrifying look, stood in front of him and said that his task was to find a way. If the guy can't, then they no longer need to hold him. The arrow quickly flew through the fog, hitting the eye of his animal. The guy, enveloped in energy, quickly covered his bleeding eye with his hand. Foam, with a stern look, put his hand on his side and looked at him and asked, did he really fail? He wiped the blood flowing from his eye with his hand and loudly said that he saw the valley. The leader, raising his weapon up, looked towards the mountain and loudly said that they were moving out. After a while, Foam looked at the cave and asked if they really went that way. They entered the cave, covered their noses with their hands and loudly said that it smelled strong here. Is this really monster feces? They walked forward and said that it wasn't like this before, the road was clean. The leader said with a stern look that it seemed fresh. Probably someone had passed by recently. Sarah looked down and said that apparently there was no point in going down this road and it would be better to find another one. Foam said he didn't agree with her and said that maybe the monster from the jungle specifically wanted this. The monster wanted them to choose another road, which meant that the other path would be more dangerous, so they would go this one. The leader confidently pointed his finger forward and loudly said that they should clear the road. At the same time, Tian looked at them and asked if they really wanted to go through. Wasn't the obstacle too obvious? He confidently stood up from his knees and said that he didn't care, and they could wait. Now they were moving on to Plan B. The mushroom on his shoulder stood in a confident pose and made a sound in its language. The mushroom clan lives all over the jungle. They may seem harmless, but they are actually very useful in the jungle. Their grow skill allows them to move freely underground and help the protagonist explore the area. In order to become more popular with the mushrooms, Tian ate the food he cooked with them. The protagonist covered his face with a purification mushroom with air purification and odor elimination functions to avoid smelling feces. He said that they eventually became good friends with the Mushroom King. Now he is helped by dozens of mushroom tribes, including the communication mushroom on the protagonist's shoulder. Stinking mushrooms are large mushrooms that can emit the smell of dirt and various smells. Tian, with a sinister grin on his face with a mushroom on his shoulder, said loudly that it was time for a real battle, and the hunt began. After some time, several ecstasy mushrooms emitted a pungent smell that drove the monsters crazy. The wolves smelled the smell and looked ahead. The team members came out of the cave loudly said that they finally passed it. Foam looked to the side and told them to stop complaining. Judging by the map, they will be safe after this zone. The fair-haired man looked ahead, raised his hand and loudly said that this was impossible. He quickly looked at the fire in the bushes, loudly called out to the leader, and said that there were monsters there. The wolves with a terrifying look quickly ran towards him. Feng, cutting the wolf with his weapon, loudly said that they should not worry. These are just a couple of low-level monsters. They are just looking for trouble. The team members looked around and loudly said that they are there too. The wolves with angry faces quickly ran forward, shaking the ground beneath them. The captain gritted his teeth, hit the wolf and loudly asked, "Why are they all running here?" Feng, looking angry, loudly said that this cannot be. Someone is planning something against them. He loudly told everyone to retreat and quickly get out of here. Several team members fell to the ground under the pressure of the monster's attacks. A large mushroom with a smile on its face quickly jumped down, emitting gases. It sent a stream of pink smoke, driving the monsters crazy. The guys looked up and asked, "Are the monsters really gone?" "They are finally saved." Tian, standing in the smoke, asked if they remember him. The squad members looked at the standing protagonist in the form of a praying mantis, and loudly said that it was Tian. The guy with an angry look said that they did not want to kill him. It was the company that told them to do it. The main character with a thoughtful look, putting his hand on his chin, said that they wanted to tell him that they were just doing their job. The guy with beads of sweat on his face looked ahead and thought that this was their chance. They quickly headed towards him and loudly told this monster to get out of here. Tian looked ahead and said that if it were just a job, but now it was a personal insult. He quickly flew forward and cut the guys. The main character with a smirk on his face looked ahead. The system window notifies that the task of hunting aliens is 40% complete. Tian received a reward of 400 jungle points. The main character, looking at the corpses of the guys, said that he thought that he would not dare to kill people. Apparently Tian was wrong and he no longer feels like he belongs to the human race. The protagonist extended his finger to the system window that appeared and said loudly that the reward for completing the first stage of the task was exactly 400 points. He only needed 100 points to unlock the flight. Tian turned his head towards the mushroom on his shoulder with a smile on his face, and said loudly that he had done well. He not only put them out, but also divided them. The mushroom moved its hands with a joyful look and said something in its own language. The protagonist looked ahead and said that it was now time to return to the dark stone forest. The goblin general was not such a simple person. Now they were moving on to Plan C, driving away the tiger and eating the wolf. After some time in the dark stone forest, the goblin ran quickly to the entrance of the cave and loudly addressed the general, and said that he was reporting to him. Many monkeys came. They killed all the brothers outside the valley and broke into it. They came to Elena's butterfly elf clan again. The general stood up from the throne holding a weapon in his hand and said loudly that the king's plan was not yet complete. They couldn't be allowed to get close to the eucalyptus. He raised his weapon and headed towards the exit and said loudly that they should follow him and kill the outsiders. After a while, Feng said loudly that the reason the team took so much damage was because of their poor reconnaissance. The guy put his hands on his head with tears in his eyes and said that he drew the map correctly. There was something wrong here. Those monsters had a well-thought-out plan. The leader raised his weapon with an angry look and loudly told him to stop. He also said that they didn't need trash on the team. It was time for him to pay for his mistakes. Sarah, her face red, put her hands on his arm and loudly addressed the leader. She told Feng to let him go. This was his first mistake. She only had one younger brother. The leader looked at her with a stern look and asked if he really needed to let him go. Feng looked down and said loudly that if it weren't for the murders his family had done for the team, he would definitely gouge his eyes out. The guy knelt down, bowed and loudly thanked the leader. Feng raised his hand as he left and said that they would spend the night here. They could rest and regain their strength to set out on their journey tomorrow. The guys looked at him and said that it was undoubtedly his fault, but he was blaming it on them. He really deserved to be the leader. Sarah was only coming back tonight. The guy loudly told them to stop chatting, because the captain was still here. Sen, looking angry, sat on the box and clutched his bow in his hands. At the same time, Tian looked down in surprise using his stealth skill. He said that he remembered reading information about them in the company. Archer Sen and Sarah were a couple. It seems that he committed a crime by hiding in the jungle. After the jungle fell under the power of the Xinchuan Technology Company, it is possible that the Jungle Law Enforcement Agency disappeared. As a result, most of the main players in Apocalypse's survival turned out to be criminals. They are not able to survive in the outside world. The law of the jungle is even more cruel in this jungle. The main character put his finger on his chin and looking down said that this guy is unhappy. He even agrees that he is being cheated on. Why doesn't Tian help him? After some time, the guys are sitting by the fire under the night sky holding glasses in their hands. The man with a smile on his face said loudly that the captain is not moving fast enough. It seems that something is wrong with him now. The guy raised his hand, laughed, and said that he better not tell the captain about Sarah's figure. They asked where Sen is. It seems that he will not be able to sleep again tonight. The mushrooms hiding behind the box near him exuded pink smoke. The mushrooms affect Sam's consciousness and show him things that he would not like to see. The sound mushroom amplifies sounds and the mushroom spreads fog, because of which it is difficult to distinguish reality from illusion. Tian, watching what is happening, said that psychedelic mushrooms erase the boundaries of reality and illusion. Some unpleasant memories can become deeper. It can make people do things they wouldn't dare to do in their right minds. The protagonist peered into the distance and said that the goblin army was almost here. These monsters are fools. Even after they were shown the way, they were still very slow. Tian confidently said that when all the participants started fighting, he would do something. The protagonist would come out of the shadows and kill everyone with one blow. It was just perfect. He thought that Sen should go in there and kill them all. The guy looked at the captain walking towards the tent and asked what he was going to do. Sam, with beads of sweat on his face, extended his hand and wondered what was wrong with him. How could he even think of that? Foam would have killed him. Tian, with a puzzled look, wondered, had the toxin stopped working? This guy's energy was quite strong. Foam said loudly with a cigar in his hand that he dared to show only a little bit of his deadly aura. Sam was still such a child. Sarah lay on his chest and said that Sam was her ex-boyfriend after all. She asked him not to make trouble for him. Foam told her not to worry because he was a capable guy. He wouldn't do anything until Sam dumped him. Sarah reached out to the scar on his chest and asked if it hadn't healed yet. The leader gritted his teeth and said that scars from abilities with charms weren't easy to heal. She said with a sad look that the company had organized the siege operation. If it weren't for Foam, she would have probably died in the battle. The leader said that it was no wonder Sam ran away in fear. That guy, Tian, was so scary. In one battle, he showed the martial arts of a warrior, the abilities of a magician, and the agility of an assassin. He is the only professional warrior in all of humanity. The main character stuck to the group and pretended to be weak. They were the only ones left in the battle of the 7 teams, and it was terrible. Luckily, he died in the jungle. In the worst case, he would have been their worst opponent. Tian quickly looked down from the mountain and said that this guy really left the team. Did he run away because he wanted to kill Feng and was afraid of revenge from him? If Sam is so afraid, it is no wonder why they cheat on him. The protagonist confidently put his hand on his hip and said that in any case, the plan to get rid of all 3 parties failed. The goblin army is already approaching the camp and he will leave this side to them. Tian looked at him with his skill and thought that if they can take Sam to themselves, this operation will be considered a success. The guys loudly said that this is an enemy attack. Feng quickly stood up and loudly said what was going on. They walked out of the tent and looked at the goblin standing in a stream of smoke. The leader hit the goblin with a weapon and asked, what happened here? Why didn't the camp defense warn them? Was it really destroyed by the goblins? At the same time, the second-level mushrooms carry low-level crystals. They are used to create camp defense. Foam, with an angry look, said loudly, how can something as undeveloped as a goblin think about removing its defense before an attack? The general quickly jumped forward from the stream of smoke and loudly said in his language for them to get out of the way. He quickly raised his weapon above the leader with the intention of attacking and loudly said in his language that they were monkeys. The general dealt him a powerful attack. Foam, with a shaking weapon in his hands, loudly said that he was very strong. The leader was not at all suitable as an opponent for him. The general, with a confident look and an aura in his eyes, quickly raised his weapon. Foam, jumping back from the blow, loudly asked, where are the archers? We need to immediately take formation. The guy, defending himself with a sword from the attacks of the goblin, loudly said that Sam had left the team. The leader, gritting his teeth, running forward, loudly said, how dare they run away from the team? Sam, with an angry look, looking forward, loudly said that the camp was attacked so early. He had nothing to do with it at all. The captain, looking at the streams of smoke in the distance, loudly said that they should burn those freaks to the ground. After a while, Tian, standing on a branch in the forest, looked at him and thought that although Sam was alone, his level was still a little higher. The protagonist used his sharpness skill. Sensei looked around and asked, is the monster already somewhere nearby? He looked to the side and said that the monster was in that direction. He pulled the bowstring and used an explosive arrow, He shot at the dummy and said that it was a decoy. Lin Tian appeared behind him and used an instant attack. Before the blow, Sensei managed to block his attack with a bow. He looked at him with a serious look and said that he distracted him in order to attack from an ambush. He knocked him back a little with a bow, and then began to attack him and said that he had the agility of an assassin. Suddenly Lin Tian jumped back and used an ability called stealth. Sensei reached for another arrow and asked how he could disappear. Could it be that he used this skill to continue to pursue him? He pulled back the bowstring and cast a light spell, and then he said that he did not know whether it was a human or a monster, but he had to show him his true colors. He released an arrow from his bow, but Lin Tian caught it and asked with a smile on his face, was his stealth no longer effective? He broke the arrow and said that he still had no chance. Sensei looked at him with annoyance and pulled back the bowstring, and then wanted to say something, but suddenly a green smoke appeared in front of him. He looked around in surprise and asked, "What is this?" Misty poisonous mushrooms that can secrete mild toxins. They enter the body through the respiratory tract. Usually, the toxin is broken down by the body, but under high physical exertion, it can explode inside the body. He leaned on the arrow and said with an irritated look that it is a toxic gas, but the toxin is very weak and not fatal. He looked up at him and thought that although he had the antidote, he would rather leave things as they were to take advantage of the situation. Lin Tian looked at him with a smile, and there was a mushroom on his shoulder, and he said that he was still sane. He was truly worthy of being an elite team leader. He shouldn't expect him to fight him fairly. He summoned the mushrooms and they surrounded Lin Tian, and they looked at Sensei with burning eyes. He looked at him with annoyance, and said loudly that he was already annoying him. Suddenly, the mushrooms started shooting at him and he tries to cover his face from their attacks. Lin Tian gave the mushroom a thumbs up and said that they did a good job. He walked towards him and said that they could finish him off now. Suddenly, 3 arrows appeared from the pile of poisonous shots, and then Sensei, who was regenerating and pulling the bowstring, climbed out. He said with an irritated look that he would destroy this monster. Lin Tian dodged all the arrows and said that even with his advanced antidote to support him, under the influence of so many toxins, the power and accuracy of his arrows were far from perfect. He put his hand to his face and his mask began to disappear, and then he said that the level of his attacks was no longer effective. Sensei looked at him with a frightened look, and then Lin Tian hit him and looking at him, he said that his enemy can rest in peace. The system says that the mission called Hunting Intruders has been completed by 50%, and he will receive 100 jungle points as a reward. He looks at the system window and says that he has raised his level to 12 and received another 100 jungle points as a reward. He can use them to unlock the skill. Lin Tian turned around questioningly and saw that a circle had formed behind him, and he said that it was a teleportation magic circle. He put his hand to his head and a mask appeared on it. At the same time, in the burning camp, the monster attacks the people, and they stand in front of it and maintain the barrier, and then say that the captain should know that Qingji is dead. He said that it is clear to him that someone has wreaked havoc and took the opportunity to kill the separated team member. He snorted in dissatisfaction and said that everything is still under his control. The monster swung and the people said that Sarah should teleport them away from this place. She used ritual teleportation magic and the monster hit the ground, and then looked questioningly at the place where his enemies had just been. Lin Tian looked at the circle and asked, was this really a bait to lure him out? Several people appeared in the circle and the captain asked, why is there a monster here and how is this possible? A level 10 monster attacks a level 10 hunter. In this game, at the same level, monsters are usually slightly stronger than humans. But compared to monsters, humans have one major advantage. They know how to plan, group, and set traps. Many hunters hold a huge monster and attack it, so humans have a unique advantage of killing monsters 10 levels higher than themselves. But now there is a monster that uses human tactics to hunt them. Luo Feng looked at him with fear and asked, is this a monster with a human mind and how is this possible? Lin Tian took off his mask and asked with a smile on his face if Luo Feng remembered him. He is holding his axe in his hands, and then said with fear that he is the monster that destroyed the 3rd and 4th teams. He is still alive and has turned into a real jungle monster. One of the people behind him said with fear in his eyes that he does not want to die here. Luo Feng looked at him with annoyance and said that he must stop this right now. They shouldn't be afraid of him, although he doesn't know what methods he used to obtain the monster's body. But his level is not that high yet, he's only level 12. Lin Tian put his hand to his chin and thought that there were too many of them. Even if all the mushrooms participated in the battle, They might not be able to win, and his trump card with the mushrooms would be wasted. With the monster's will, he has a chance to win, but he doesn't think he can restore its will this time. The hunters became wary, and Luo Feng said that he was no longer a human warrior like before. He was just a weak monster hiding in the shadows and relying on his tricks. He regretted that he couldn't kill him earlier, but this time he had a mage to immobilize his soul before he killed him. He wouldn't let him escape again. Lin Tian covered his face with his hand and laughed loudly, then said with a serious expression that if he thought he could kill him, he should not say such things and make him laugh. Lu Delong led 7 teams, but he still couldn't defeat him. Do they still think they can do it? The hunters looked at him in fear, and then the bald man put his hands to his face and said that he would kill them. Luo Feng looked at them with annoyance and said that they were all a bunch of losers. He jumped up and used a martial skill called Mountain Slash, then said that he was just a low-level monster and he should die. Lin Tian clicked on the system window with a serious expression and activated a skill called Flight. Luo Feng launched a powerful punch that made people barely stand still, but Lin Tian was able to dodge his punch with Flight. The system reported that he had successfully learned and mastered a skill called Flight. He spread his wings and said with a serious expression that they should prepare to die. The mages and archers aimed at him, and they said that they should shoot him. Lin Tian was thrown back by the enemy shots, and Sarah pulled her hand back and said that everyone should step back and she would handle it. She cast a magic called Dazzling Light Array. Several small magic circles appeared next to Lin Tian, and he said that with the ability to send spells over such a long distance, she was truly worthy of the title of leader of the mages. He accelerated and flew away from her projectiles and said that he was still faster than them. Luo Feng swung his axe at him, and it hit him, and he asked if a level 15 warrior's throwing skill was that bad. They all looked at him, and Luo Feng said in disappointment that he still couldn't catch him. Lin Tian gave him the middle finger, and he said that he would definitely kill him next time. He flew away, and Luo Feng reached out his hand to them, and he said that they should find him as soon as possible. One of the hunters holds Sarah and says that the LiDAR's teleportation will require a lot of energy, and she can't do anything else. They look at Sensei's corpse, and he said that in their team, the only one who can track the flying target is Captain Sen, but he is already dead. Luo Feng said with an irritated look that they are a bunch of losers and are of no use. Sarah walked up to him and said that her dear one doesn't need to worry because he is under the effect of her light array spell. She will be able to track him with her magical aura that is now left on him. He flies above the forest and takes off his mask, then says with a tired expression that he must cross the valley while avoiding the hordes of monsters along with the goblin guardians before entering the tree realm. He recalled the orb that is lying on the pedestal and said that the key to the tree realm is not a physical object, but an altar under a eucalyptus tree. It requires a large amount of magical power to open it. Even after several attempts, the campaign to find the location of the altar has failed. So he planned to have Luo Feng and the goblins fight each other to the death in order to reap the benefits and advance to level 15 before wasting time searching for him. He didn't expect that Luo Feng, who seemed like a fool, would be so cunning. He put a mark on his team members to distinguish them from the opponents, and this ruined his plans. He approaches the eucalyptus tree and said that although he was able to escape by unlocking the flight skill, now he will not be able to destroy both sides. And the goblin guards will return to the eucalyptus tree, so he will not be able to find the altar. The mage definitely marked him in that fuss. They marked him, and he can take advantage of it. He penetrated the barrier and said that if Luo Feng leaves the expedition and returns to report that he is still alive, he will be in trouble. But he thinks that with his character, this is unlikely to happen. At the same time, Luo Feng and the other hunters discussed the plan, and Sarah said that this is very strange, because he was definitely dead, and she does not understand how he could turn into a monster and survive. One of them said that they need to send an expedition and report his location immediately. The other members of the squad agree with him and said that this is a great idea and the company can deal with it, because they can't handle him. He is the devil and no one knows what other trump cards he will show them. Last time one of them barely survived and he does not want to fight him again. Luo Feng looked down and asked, are they really talking about reporting this to Lu Dalong? He remembered the past, where he was kneeling in front of him, and he was standing with a serious look with a blade and saying that strength is the basis of the law of the jungle, the price of continued existence. If he wants to survive in the jungle, then he must prove to him that he is worthy of it. He said with a serious look that this should not be and they cannot tell Lu Dalong. Sarah walked up to him and bringing her hand to him said that he is very unusual, and she marked him with a spell. So if they report to the company, they will still be able to track him, and they will not let him escape. He looked at her seriously and said that she should not forget that he designed the entire game system. He knows the requirements and skills of all the classes, but if they work together, they might be able to finish him off. He goes first, and his entire squad follows him. He said that once he has time to recover, there is no way they cannot find him anymore even if they report to Lu Dalong. If he finds out that they couldn't deal with a level 12 monster, there will be nothing left of them. Besides, he was the one who proposed the development of the Helen butterflies. He was targeting them, but they only got caught in the crossfire, and his target is the eucalyptus tree. He said seriously that they will definitely meet him again once they find the altar and the eucalyptus tree. They said at the same time that they can't miss this opportunity, and they must kill the other in the jungle. A few days later, the eucalyptus tree kingdom. Several hunters are standing next to the crystal, and one of them is sitting in front of it, and he said that the crystal composition in the northwest corner is laid out, and the forming link is complete. Sarah cast a magic circle, and she said that the last crystal in the northwest corner is set, and they can build a barrier. The barrier descended, and she said with a tired look that the barrier is set, so even if he is able to fly and be invisible, there is no way for him to escape the zone. However, the magical aura from the mark on him is becoming weaker and weaker, and it is becoming more and more difficult to catch him. Luo Feng holds her, and he said that this is just the last shot, because with his current strength, there is a chance that he will continue to cause trouble. But if they find him, there is nothing they can do anymore, because the boundaries are too large. Lin Tian and the altar of the Tree Kingdom are here, and if they find him here, there is no way for him to escape. He spies on them on the tree, and then he said that he has been fighting them using guerrilla tactics for several days now, but he still hasn't found the altar. Using mushrooms, he studied the distribution of monsters in the valley. He pretended to be a human and attacked the monster camps, provoking fights between the monsters, Luo Feng and the others. He repeated this several times, but once they are prepared, it is virtually impossible to damage them. With pet spirit masters tracking the goblin troops' movements, mages providing healing, and archer warriors wreaking havoc on the battlefield, one can be sure that they will form a fully armed brave team that is virtually invincible in the jungle. As long as they don't encounter the goblin general, they can clear the valley of monsters. After all, the upper limit of the levels of the local monsters is not very high. He put his hand to his chin and thought that when they defeated the goblins and jungle monsters, the magicians would set up magical barriers, narrowing the area around the eucalyptus tree. Fortunately, this spiritual tree can mask the magical mark, although he had raised his level to 13, but he could not do anything against them. Mushroom thought about it, and he looked at him and asked, did he still not find the altar? There was only a little left, but fortunately with the Mushroom clan's sensitivity to the spiritual power of earthly bells, it should be possible. Mushroom looked at him with a satisfied look, and Lin Tian picked him up and he said that since he found it, then it was time for the decisive battle. Sarah looked for the altar with a smile on her face, and then with a satisfied look she said that she found it. Luo Feng with a serious look said that they needed to go, and it was not far, and it should be that he had found the entrance to the Tree Kingdom. He took the axe in his hand and said that they should follow him, and this time they should kill him. Lin Tian flew out from his hiding place, and he said that they found him, and with all this in mind, this would be the last battle. He used jungle monster mobilization and said with a serious look that they should stir up the jungle, and he needed a storm as big as the valley to break out. They ran through the forest, and Luo Feng said that they needed to narrow the barrier and drive him to the eucalyptus tree, and this time they should kill him. There were many monsters running behind them, and he said that he felt like the monsters in the jungle had become animated, and he unleashed them again. He looked back and said that the left and right squads should hold off the monsters and the rest should move forward. They agreed with him and attacked the monsters. Sarah said that she thought he knew he couldn't escape this time, so he raised all the monsters in the jungle. Luo Feng runs next to her, and then he asked if he could control them. She has a map above her hand and she said that it is not quite so, because most of the time he tries to lure them into the territory of the monsters. He said with a displeased look that at the moment he used some kind of toxin to make the monsters go crazy. So far he has only shown human tactics, no more than a level 12 monster, and they have nothing to worry about. The tree breaks from a strong blow, and he said that they found it. Luo Feng, it seems to him that the boss of the Labyrinth Valley, the Goblin General, is his main trump card. He headed towards the boss and said that he will kill him, and they will see what else he has. The hunters are watching the fight between Luo Feng and the boss, and one of them said that he and the chief mage need to go up there and help the commander. Sarah raised her hand and said that there is no need to do this, because the monster is beyond the commander's strength, and they have more important enemies. She looks at the map and says that he is very close. They rush towards him, and she said that Lin Tian was right ahead and they should follow her and kill him. She thought that Feng should wait, because she was going to avenge him. Lin Tian flew up to the altar, and he said that he was not even surprised that he could not find it after so long of searching, because the eucalyptus tree was a cover. Symbols appear in front of him, and he holds his hand to his chest, and then he said that fortunately he learned the literacy of the jungle. He is sure that at the entrance to the kingdom of trees there is a magic altar, as well as the legendary stone slab. A mushroom jumps on his shoulder, and he looked at it questioningly and asked, "Are they already here?" Fire projectiles fly at him, but he dodges all the attacks. He flew back and sat down on the magic circle, and then he said that he has guests. He stood up and said that the attack and imprisonment magic were cast simultaneously, and that the leader Sarah was very talented. There were 2 mages standing behind her, and they said that the imprisonment technique had successfully locked on the target, and gravity had been cast. She said that this was very good, and Lin Tian would definitely not be able to escape this time. He said that the double binding magic that restricted flight and agility was a surefire way to deal with him. He put his hand to his chest and said that they had better keep an eye on him so that he could not escape. One of the hunters said that Sarah should not be afraid of him since he was no longer a professional warrior. He was just a level 13 monster. She raised her staff in front of her and said that he should stop talking since Lin Tian was surrounded. She spread her arms and began to cast a spell and then said that she would see what he could do to escape from this. She used a magic called Explosive Flash and hit him. At the same time, the boss was defeated and the system reported that Luo Feng had defeated the Goblin General and he had received 1,000 experience points. The system congratulated the player on reaching level 16 and he could now change his class. The monster disappeared and he looked towards it and said that he couldn't believe that he had reached level 16. But before changing his class, he needed to gather superior materials and his current strength was not enough to deal with Lin Tian. He walked up to one of the hunters and looked at him and asked where Sarah was now. At the same time, Lin Tian said with a serious expression that this magic was not strong enough, and she needed to be stronger. She put her hand in front of her, and said that the magic altar was the entrance to the tree kingdom, and if he wanted to use it to absorb their magic to block attacks, then he was very naive. She wanted to say something else, but he interrupted her, and spread his arms, and said that this was not all he could show. He raised his finger, and said that he was going to suck out all the magic power from him. A black portal appeared behind him and Sarah covered her face with her hand and said that it was impossible. And he was not even a mage. She did not understand how he cast spells. Luo Feng and the hunters ran towards them, and he said that Sarah's barrier was dissipating and they would not be able to catch him. He looked at the barrier with an irritated look and said that if they let him escape again, it would not end well. Lin Tian said that for human warriors, there are 24 classes, 72 paths, and after changing it, their skills are different. This is the science of the jungle, which was developed by Xinchuan technology to transform the jungle using the stone slab that they split here. And he was in charge of this process. While he was still a human, he could use the stone slab to realize his status as a professional warrior. Even though he is a monster now, he can no longer use the skills of a warrior. Lin Tian said with a smile on his face, and his eyes shining that by changing only a few symbols in her magic barrier he could use the altar to draw out her magic power. Her staff fell to the ground and she looked at him questioningly and asked how was this possible. She fell to her knees and the other hunters ran up to her and asked how she was feeling. She looked at Lin Tian tiredly and said that her strength was gone. He stretched out his hand and said that he originally wanted them to kill each other, and he quietly got to this place after that. But their persistence gave him inspiration. Maybe he could use them to open the tree realm. But fortunately this time they went straight after him, and if they went after Luo Feng then he would have no choice but to enter the tree realm first and figure out how to deal with them later. Sarah looked at him irritably and said that he should not get carried away, because either the commander nor the company would let him go. The hunters looked at him in fear, and then one of them said that Luo Feng was to blame for everything, and the company forced them to do this. Another hunter said that he asked Lin Tian to let them down, because they promised that they would not do this again. He said with a serious look that he had no doubt about it, because they would not look for him, and he would gradually find them all himself. Luo Feng and the other hunters ran towards them, and he said that he did not care, even if the barrier dissipated, Sarah and the others would definitely contain it. After all, with the abilities of the mage squad, there should be no problems. They turned at one place, and Luo Feng said that Lin Tian was here and he could not escape. One of the hunters turned to the commander and said that he was moving very quietly. Another hunter wanted to say something but was interrupted by Luo Feng, who looked away with an irritated look and said that this was unbelievable. Lin Tian is sitting on the altar, and with a terrifying look he asked if he has finally come. Sarah and the other hunters are lying in blood in front of them, and he said that this is the last dish of their feast. The hunters look at him in fear and say that Commander Sarah is dead, and they thought that it was just a level 12 monster, and this can't be. Lin Tian rushed towards them and said that they should relax because he is not going to deprive anyone. Some hunters run away in fear and say that they should quickly run away from here before it's too late. Lin Tian kills them and then is about to hit another one. But Luo Feng kills his own ally, and he jumped back and asked in surprise what he is doing. Luo Feng was the only one left in the group, and he asked if he was taking out his anger on his own people. He said with a serious expression that they were cowards and had lost their fighting spirit, so there was no point in leaving them alive. He said with a smile that he had made it easy for him by choosing to kill them himself. Luo Feng said with a serious expression that he now admitted that he had underestimated him before. Lin Tian asked with a smile on his face if things had changed now. Shouldn't he run away after all? The tree kingdom was open, so there were no barriers to restrain him, so he had better run. He said with a frightening expression that he shouldn't provoke him. After all, the only reason he was still here was because he was waiting for him. After using so many tricks, it was time for him to prove his strength. After all, strength was the first law of survival in the jungle. He rushed towards him, and Luo Feng defended himself from his attack, and he looked at him in surprise and thought that this guy was a typical power-type player, so he shouldn't be allowed to hit him. Lin Tian disappeared from Luo Feng's sight, and he said that he most likely used a stealth skill. He attacked him from behind, and he turned towards him and blocked his attack and threw him back. He said that this was a curse and his defense was also absurdly high. He was a monster raised with money. He jumped back and said that in that case, the only way to break through the defense was to use speed. Lin Tian began to quickly jump around to confuse Luo Feng, and he tried to hit him and asked if this was all he could do. He knocked him back into a tree, and he said that his strength was very terrifying. He came out of a large amount of dust and said that if this was his limit, then this was his end. Suddenly a mushroom jumped out in front of Luo Feng, and then more mushrooms followed him. He looked at them in surprise and asked, "What does this mean?" They started spitting poison at him, and Lin Tian looked at the liquid and asked, "Did they really hit him?" Luo Feng broke free from the poison and tried to attack him, but he dodged and he asked, "Is this mushroom all he has?" He used a body-enhanced refining gemstone and then said that it was incredible, and now he understood how he was monitoring their movements and using the forest monsters. These inconspicuous things really made him invisible. Luo Feng rushed towards him and said that if he hadn't prepared after Qingjie's death, maybe he could have killed him like this. Lin Tian looked at him with annoyance and asked, "Is this trap no longer working?" He brandished his axe and asked, "Is he really going to run away? Isn't he going to face him in a fair fight?" "He is not a warrior. He is a coward. Even with such strength, he lives like a cowardly clown in human society and in the jungle." Lin Tian flies above him, and he used the warrior weapon mastery, and chains appeared on his hands, and then he said that this coward will no longer have a chance to escape. He threw a chain at him, and Lin Tian thought that this is completely not his playstyle. He dodged the chains and headed towards him, and then hit him, and jumped to the side. Luo Feng looked at the wound on his chest, and he said that his defense was finally broken. He looked at him with a smile and asked what he was so proud of after working so hard for such a small wound. His body was covered with green veins and he was scared. Was the blade poisoned? Lin Tian clicked on the system window and said that the jungle points he got from killing Sarah and the others allowed him to awaken the final skill called poison. His blade glows green, and he said that these are no longer negative toxins like those of mushrooms that simply affect the perception of movement, but a deadly neurotoxin. Luo Feng said that he had already realized how strong a poison it was, and he felt like he had suddenly lost his strength. He fell to his knees and said that this should most likely be his trump card. He was surrounded by system windows, and Lin Tian looked at him in surprise and asked if he had already been given permission to change his class. He looked down and said that it was true, and the restriction was lifted after he left the company. He walked towards him and said with a serious expression that this could not be allowed and that he had to be stopped. His class was successfully changed to Berserker, and this power sent Lin Tian flying backwards. Luo Feng looked at himself with a satisfied expression and said that he felt that he had a huge amount of strength within him. He looked at him with annoyance and thought that Berserkers can remove all negative statuses after entering Berserk mode. At the same time, they constantly increased their fighting spirit and attack power, practically turning into a killing machine. Now he is not his opponent, shouldn't he still log out and not fight him? He attacked him, but Lin Tian dodged and he asked, does he already want to run away? He looked at him with annoyance, and thought that this was the first time they captured the entrance to the tree realm, and it seems like he doesn't have another chance. He needs to take the fight as seriously as possible. Luo Feng charged towards him and swung his sword, and he thought that he was much faster, and he wouldn't be able to dodge. He attacked him, but he defended himself and he said that he should go to hell. He knocked him back with his axe, and then he attacked him again and said that he should look at him and not turn away during the fight. From his blow, Lin Tian was pinned to the ground, but he was able to defend himself from the attack. His blade remained in Luo Feng's chest, and he said that from the berserk effect, he did not even feel anything from such a wound. He barely held him back and he said that he was defeated, and he drove him into a corner. Lin Tian said that the only way to deal with the monster was to become a monster. In this case, he had only one thing left to do. He needed to give his body to the monster. Luo Feng looked at him in surprise and he threw him back with his power. He sits on the ground and looks at him in fear, and then asked, is this really a monster? There is a monster in front of him, and he thought, how many more aces does he have up his sleeve? Lin Tian attacked him, and he tries to defend himself from his attacks, and he gets rage points for this. He headed towards him. His eyes light up red and the system reports that his rage bar has been filled. He swung at him and said with a furious look that he must die. They fight each other, and then Luo Feng stands behind him, and he said that this is really worthy of him. He fell to the ground and Lin Tian looked at him, and also fell down from powerlessness. Xinchuan Technology, Xinchuan Building Headquarters. Lu Delong stood in front of the window and asked with an irritated tone what they were doing and why they still haven't contacted Luo Feng. The girl frightenedly apologizes and says that he didn't respond to the union's message. They have increased the deployment of search equipment in the jungle, but the equipment can't work for long in the jungle. She looks down frightened and Luo Yu walked up to her and said that he shouldn't offend the intern and she has bad news. She found Luo Feng. Lu Delong turned to her side and asked, is this really bad news? After a while, Lin Tian is lying on the ground and he thought, is it because of the higher level? The monster's willpower is stronger than before and he can't allow this. He has to go further and maybe there is a chance to get out of this state. He crawls towards the altar and thinks that he has a few more steps to go. His eyes close and he thinks, can't he hold up for that long? The system says that it congratulates the player who has completed the quest called Guarding the Jungle. A comprehensive reward called Shop function is activated. He looks at the system window and says that the Shop function is working and it has been saved. He needs to find an item that eliminates mental anomalies and he needs to buy it now. The system says that the purification potion called Fountain of Destiny costs 500 jungle points, but the player currently has 0 jungle points left. He looked at the system window with annoyance and asked, why is this happening? Suddenly, he looked to the side and said that there should be an exchanger in the shop. He needs to collect equipment from the corpses and exchange them for jungle points. The system informs that the giant battle axe, composite armor and precious spirit stone are converted. The system informs that he gets 1,200 jungle points for these items, and he said that he needs to buy a potion right away. He said with tears in his eyes that Luo Feng had been struggling in the jungle for a long time and he should have a lot of rare items, but he didn't even equip them. A potion appeared in front of him, and the system informs that it congratulates the player, and the purchase was successful. At the same time, Lu Delong and Luo Yu are walking down the corridor, and he turned to her and asked if he had really entered the tree realm. She pressed the button on the panel and said that the jungle force field had just shown a powerful surge of magic in the Labyrinth Valley, and this is a sign that the tree realm has been opened. He said that since he had opened the tree realm, he should have informed them first, but for some reason he didn't. The door in front of them opened, and she said that it might have something to do with it. The capsule contained the core of the jungle stone, and she said that the energy of the jungle stone force field was getting stronger. It took them a lot of effort to barely stabilize the portal, and later, the time was approaching when the jungle would swallow the earth. Dalong asked with a serious look, what does this have to do with Feng entering the tree kingdom? Luo said that Tian's disappearance caused a big uproar on the gang forums. The 4 major player alliances were asking questions to the company. Some had already guessed the secret of the upcoming jungle expansion. Dalong put his hands in his pockets and walked forward and asked, really the 4 player alliances? Why bother with these hillbillies if they can't change anything? Luo said that it took the company decades of excavation in the jungle to find the 7 jungle stone tablets, and they were all here. She looked at the slab in the flask and said that these 7 stone slabs not only give them a basic understanding of the history of the jungle. They allow them to use the inexplicable power of the slabs to develop technology. Dalong looked forward with a serious expression and said that he knew these things better than her. She didn't need to emphasize this to him again. Luo crossed her arms and said that the jungle stone slabs were the only way to study the information of the jungle. The 4 missing slabs were the only way to see the depths of the jungle. Only when humans entered the jungle would they have a chance to take the initiative. Dalong looked at her with an interested expression and asked if she had any news about the remaining 4 slabs. Luo looked at him with a serious expression and said that she suspected that one of the slabs was in the tree kingdom. Dalong asked with a confident expression, "Wouldn't it be right for Feng to attack the tree kingdom?" Luo put her finger on her chin with a thoughtful expression and said that the day the jungle would devour the earth was too close. There were too many changes and she was afraid that Feng might have gotten into trouble. Dalong raised his hand as he left and said that he knew it and that he would go to the jungle himself. She should let him know if there was any news there. After a while, Tian sat on the ground at the entrance and put his hand on his head. He thought that the monsters had retreated, but the effect didn't seem to have been removed, but was simply suppressed. His level had been raised to 15. The potions bought from the store could only eliminate the symptoms, but not the root of the problem. He still needed Elena's purification power. The protagonist didn't have the chance to collect his equipment earlier. As a result, it was difficult to destroy them all. All the items were converted into jungle points, so it was a waste of time. Tian stretched his finger towards the system window with a tense expression and said loudly, "A bottle of potion costs 500 points. Why is it so expensive?" He needs to see what else is in this store. The protagonist confidently looked at the system window, which says that these are equipment goods. He raised his hand and thought that it has 10 cubic meters of storage space. This store is quite portable. He still has 700 jungle points left, so he can look at something. Tian stretched his hand towards the image of armor with 70 defense on the system window. The protagonist thoughtfully decided that this one looked good. Physical defense is increased by 70 points. If he puts it on, against Feng, he would have coped even without the monster's body. The system window notifies that he does not have enough jungle points. Tian puts his hands on his head with an angry expression and asks loudly, "Is it really 1,000 jungle points?" The quality of Feng's items was better, and with the addition of other processed items, the total price exceeded 1,000. This is just some kind of robbery. The protagonist looked at the system window that appeared with a puzzled look. He thought that he had a new mission, so it was better to save some jungle points in case something went wrong. The system window notifies that he needs to protect the jungle, and there is a side quest. Tian needs to save the Helen butterflies. The elves in the eucalyptus tree realm have been invaded by intruders. It is his duty to save them. Completing the quest is accompanied, and progress will unlock the B rank skill bar. The protagonist looked at the system window with an interested look and thought that there was a chance to unlock the B rank skill bar. The last advanced skill was Monster Will. He wonders how amazing the B rank skill will be. Tian extended his finger and thought that it did not matter. Soon the company will receive news of the capture of the Tree Kingdom. He stood in front of the mushrooms and raised his hand and said that he was leaving traces on this path for them. The protagonist looked ahead with a confident look and thought that it was time to set off on a new journey. The kingdom of trees must wait for him. After some time, the fairies turned to the great prophet and savior. They said loudly that his name would be blessed and his will would be blessed. The fairies looked at the burning fire and turned to the prophet, the great savior, and loudly said that he should come down and save them. There was no movement from the altar with the fiery flame. The fairies looked at each other with sad faces and said that they had failed again. Aren't they religious enough? They have been praying for so many years. Is it possible that the prophet does not exist? The fairy, flying rapidly towards them, loudly said that they should run away. The fairies were discovered by the goblins, and they needed to be faster. The goblins jumped on the fairy with smirks and asked how they dared to leave the colony. The fairy loudly told them to stop. She looked at them with a frightened look and said that their king made a promise to their princess. A promise that the goblins would no longer invade and mock their kind. Aren't they afraid of being punished? The goblins with smirks on their faces said that it would be if they had not left the colony. Where are the fairies now? The promise does not apply to that. Since they broke the covenant first, they should not be blamed for their rudeness. The fairies turned to the savior and loudly told him to appear. The fairy kneeled before the altar and told him to save them and drive out these invaders. The goblins with confident faces asked if they still believed in this legend. The fairies quickly looked at the bright light near the altar and loudly said that this was the savior. This must be the great savior who came to save them. The goblins with irritated faces quickly ran forward and loudly said, "What kind of savior is this?" The fairies covered themselves from the powerful stream of air. Tian flew past the goblin at great speed, raising his hand. The protagonist hit him with great force with his hand and slid along the ground. He confidently turned to the side and asked, "Is this the kingdom of trees? Why are the goblins here?" The fairies with admiration folded their hands, turned to the savior, and said that the Lord Savior appeared. The Lord Savior really exists. Tian with a puzzled look put his hand on his head and thought, what kind of savior are they talking about? After some time in the fairy village, the village headman Ray, standing in the room, said that the savior is just a legend. He does not exist. The fairies looking at her said that he came out of the altar and saved them. Ray asked with an angry look, how many times had she told them not to go there again? There were a lot of goblins there. The fairy said with a pitiful look that Karika had been sick for a long time. They needed to collect medicine for her, so they went to the captured area. The pink-haired fairy looked ahead and said that they did not find any medicine, so they thought of the altar. The blonde fairy said with a sad look that there was no medicine, but they found a savior. Ray turned to the side with angrily, and said that how many times had she told them already that this guy was not a savior. The fairies looked at her, and said loudly that he had a way to save Tarika. The pink-haired fairy turned to Ray and said loudly that her healing spells did not work on her. He must be a real savior. After some time, the fairy looked at Karika and said that her condition had stabilized. Ray entered the room and said that she could not believe that she was getting better. His medicine really works. Tian thought with a fake smile on his face. It was the effect of the healing potion. It costs 100 points, but Ray still looked at him warily. She closed her eyes with a stern look and said loudly that then he should wait until Karika gets better before leaving. The fairies surrounded the protagonist and loudly thanked the great savior. After a while, Tian, holding a glass in his hand, said that their fairy tribe's territory was captured by goblins. The blonde fairy raised her hand with a pitiful look and agreed with him. She said loudly that many years ago, they appeared out of nowhere and captured most of the tree kingdom. Fortunately, their princess intervened and made a pact with them to protect them. The protagonist put his finger to his chin with a thoughtful look and thought that fairies were purely an auxiliary race. They don't know how to fight, and even high-level fairies only have auxiliary skills. That's why they are captured by other races. The fairy tribe is the purest bloodline race, and their princess is the destination of his journey. Tian put his hand on the table and looked at them and asked, what kind of talk is this about a savior? The fairies looked forward in surprise and asked, isn't he the savior? Why does he need them anyway? The blonde fairy confidently covered part of her face with her hand and said that that gentleman was 100 years ago. The protagonist is definitely his reincarnation. Now that he has no memories of his past life, he naturally doesn't remember what happened before. The fairy said that Tian is just an incredible legend. What else can they say? The protagonist put his hand on his chin with an arrogant look and said that they are right. Although he was summoned by them, he remembers nothing except his duty to protect them. The fairy said that the savior gentleman is the great benefactor of their tribe. When their tribe came to the jungle many years ago, suffering from the big races, he saved them. With the help of magic, he created this secret place where they live. That is why he is considered the savior of their tribe. Unfortunately, soon after, the savior left. After he left, he told their ancestors that he would come back again when they were in trouble. Tian looked down with a thoughtful look and thought that this was just a legend from 100 years ago. These small creatures are very easy to deceive. They said that they came here many years ago. Were they swallowed by the jungle like the earth? He raised his hand with a smile on his face and asked, in that case, shouldn't they be very small? The blonde fairy raised her finger and said, this ancestor mentioned that there was a boundary at the entrance to the tree realm. It reduced the creatures entering the tree realm to the size of their tribe. Tian asked with a serious expression, how many goblins were there and how strong were they? The fairy said loudly that over the years, they had captured many parts of the tree realm, and their numbers were huge. The main combatants were several level 15 generals, and the most powerful goblin king was level 20. Even the most powerful warrior of their fairy tribe, the queen's husband, had reached level 25. Even he was unable to urge the goblin king. The fairy tribe was a matrilineal tribe, and the male fairies had some fighting strength, but they were relatively weak. A level 25 fairy would already be strong among the monsters. He was unable to defeat the Goblin King, who was 5 levels lower. However, the overall strength of this group of goblins was not that strong, so it seemed there was no need to worry. Fortunately, Her Highness holds them back. She seals the Tree Kingdom if they get out of control. Then the Tree Kingdom slowly began to wither, and the goblins and the fairy tribe would perish along with it. In the end, because the Goblin King had a request for their tribe, they made a truce with him, and both sides stopped fighting. The goblins are also advancing in the Tree Kingdom, and their territory is being squeezed. Tian looked at them with interest and asked, "Isn't the Goblin King's goal to be baptized by the princess?" The fairy said loudly that nothing passes by the savior, that's how it is. The protagonist looked at the glass in his hand with a serious expression. He thought that low-level monsters like goblins and fairies, mushroom monsters, can only reach level 20 at most, even if they train hard enough. However, after being baptized, they can overcome the limitation of their bloodline. Similar to the transformation of a human warrior. There are very few magical creatures and objects in the jungle that can perform baptism, and the fairy is one of them. A fairy can only perform baptism once in her lifetime. The purer the bloodline of the fairies, the higher the talent of the baptized monster will be. Her Majesty baptized her husband, so the Goblin King could only turn his attention to the fairy princess, thus concluding a temporary non-aggression pact. The fairies, with tears in their eyes, loudly said that the fairy princess was a genius of the tribe. This happens once in a century, and now she is almost ready for baptism. If she does this, it will be tantamount to signing a contract with him for life. They will not tolerate Her Highness being subjected to this. Tian gritted his teeth, quickly slammed his hand on the table, and loudly said that they should not worry. The protagonist is here to prevent Her Highness from falling into the hands of the Goblin King. The fairies jubilantly turned to the savior in loud voices. Tian said loudly that she was his beloved princess. He couldn't let her fall into the hands of the goblins. The protagonist, with beads of sweat on his face, thought that this reminded him of the bad mangas he had read. Tian, with a smile on his face, stood up, pointed his finger forward and asked where the palace was. How could he get to their princess? The fairies looked at him and said that the Tree Kingdom was very large. It would take a week to get there on foot. It would be much faster with the help of the teleportation array. They, with flushed faces, looked forward and said that, however, the portal could only be activated under the protection of Ray. She seemed to not trust the savior. They could try to persuade her, but most likely, they would fail. Tian, with a thoughtful look, put his hand on his chin and thought that it would be bad if he teleported to an unknown place. Therefore, the first step would be to gain the trust of the village chief. If he could cure that fairy, he would have at least some hope. The system window notifies that the presence of an enemy has been detected. The protagonist needs to defeat the advancing enemy. Tian, with an angry look, quickly stood in front of the fairies and loudly said that the enemy is approaching. The fairies, quickly flying towards the entrance, said loudly that this is not good. The Goblin General is here to find the savior. The fairies, looking forward, said loudly that it is as befits a savior. He predicted the appearance of the enemy before he appeared. Tian thought that the level of the Goblin General should be the same as his past opponent, so he can use him to gamble. If the protagonist wins, he can perhaps gain Ray's trust. Tian, with a confident look, standing among the steam, thought that just the Goblin General, he will go and kill him. Not far from the village, the fairies looked at the goblins and said that their king made a deal with their princess. They told the goblins not to take any more action against them until the day of baptism. Why did they suddenly invade their village? The general put his weapon on his shoulder and said that he heard that a monster had appeared in their village. He suspected that this monster was an intruder, and the general was here to help them destroy it. The fairies with angry faces said that he was wrong. This was their honorable savior, His Excellency, and there was no need to insult him. The fairy raised her hand in surprise and said that it was exactly like that. A savior was not an intruder. Roy calmly leaned her hand on her cane and disagreed with them. She said that there were no saviors and this guy was not a savior. He was just a guest who would leave soon. The fairies turned to her side and said loudly that this was the village chief. Roy angrily said that they were not in any danger here. The goblins were not allowed to come closer. The general quickly pointed his hand at her and told her not to tell a lie. They injured his men and want to avoid punishment. If they don't want to hand him over to them, then the general will get him himself. Roy looked ahead with fear and loudly told him not to come near. Tian quickly hit the Goblin General in the face. His body flew to the side at high speed, creating a stream of smoke as he hit the ground. The protagonist, with a confident look, standing among the streams of smoke, said that the general does not need to look for him, he came himself. Tian, with a smirk on his face, asked, can he really not withstand one blow? The general, with a terrifying look, quickly jumped up and asked, is it really him? The goblin, with an ominous look, raised his fist up with the intention of attacking. The protagonist looked at the system window above the goblin's head, which notified that it was the goblin general. The reward for killing him was 1,000 jungle points. Tian thought that now that he was given a quest, he could calmly collect his points. The general raised his weapon up in anger and loudly told him to leave. The general with a red aura in his eyes pointed his weapon forward, creating a flow of air. Tian looked forward with a serious expression and thought that compared to Feng, when he became enraged, his strength was too weak. The general with an ominous expression, emitting a red aura, raised his weapon up and said loudly that he was doing nothing but dodging. The protagonist dodging his attack said that the goblin was losing his patience so quickly. He jumped forward with a smile on his face and said loudly that they would do it quickly then. Tian pointed a sharp claw forward, piercing the general's weapon. The goblin looked in surprise at the remaining bone in his hand. The protagonist with a smirk on his face quickly raised his hand and said that he would be defeated in 3 rounds. The fairies closed their eyes and said loudly that the Lord Savior was incredible. Tian with a puzzled expression thought about what kind of feeling this was. The general with an angry expression jumped towards him, stretching out his hand forward. The protagonist with a green aura in his eyes dodged the beam of energy. He thought that during the battle, the monsters will really start to act. The fountain of fate can only suppress it, but not solve it completely. Tian gritted his teeth in pain, put his hand on his head and closed his eyes, thinking that he was entering monster mode again. The general furiously created beams of energy with his weapon, and loudly told the protagonist to continue fighting. Isn't he their savior? Tian quickly blocked the beams with his arms crossed. He thought that if the fairies realized that he had changed and purified him before that happened, they would be able to suppress the will for a while. The protagonist would be able to win the trust of the village chief. The general quickly ran forward holding his weapon in his hand. Tian, with a terrifying appearance, screamed loudly, changing his appearance. He rushed forward at great speed, emitting a green aura. The protagonist gritted his teeth and wondered what was going on. He couldn't hold on to his willpower for long. When would the fairies be able to help him? Roy looked away with a frightened expression and thought that this was the aura of dark magic. She was sure that it was of unknown origin. Tian thought with a terrifying expression, did these creatures not understand what was happening? His monster will was going out of control. The protagonist with a frightening look let out a menacing cry. The general said loudly that he had gone crazy. He asked loudly with a frightened look, what was wrong with him? The protagonist, having become a monster, loudly said for him to die. Tian quickly moved forward, throwing aside stones from the ground. He, with a red aura in his eye, raised his hands, approaching the general. The goblin with beads of sweat on his face looked back and loudly said that this was a curse. In this case, they would all die together. The protagonist with a red aura in his eyes stopped and looked up. The fairies loudly called out to the village elder. The protagonist, gritting his teeth, dug his claws into his chest and thought that he should not touch these little creatures. The general sent a beam of energy towards him and loudly said for him to feel the blow. The fairies, with fear, quickly leapt forward and loudly called out to the Lord Savior. Tian, gritting his teeth, standing among the streams of smoke, thought, are these little creatures really so stupid that they just look? No wonder they can't hold their territory. The general, with a sinister look, holding a weapon in his hand, loudly told him to continue in the same spirit. He raised his hand with protruding veins upwards, preparing to attack, and loudly told the savior to go to hell. Rui, with an angry look, stood in front of the protagonists and asked what he was going to do with their savior. The general, with a stern look, turned to the side and addressed the goblins loudly told them to stop her. The goblins, with malicious grins on their faces, quickly ran forward. The fairies, emitting bright light, surrounded Tian. The protagonist, emitting light, stood up from the ground and wondered if this was the cleansing power of the tribe. A beam of dark energy flew through the goblins, injuring them. The general, looking towards the standing Tian, asked what this was. The protagonist looked back with a smile on his face and wondered if he had finally won the elder's favor. Then it was time for him to end the game. He stood confidently surrounded by fairies shrouded in fire and asked if the general was ready for the wrath of the fairy tribe. The general looked forward with a frightened look. Tian quickly jumped forward and cut his body with his claws. The fairies surrounded the protagonist and loudly praised him. The system window notified that he had defeated the goblin general. Tian had completed the mission to save the fairy tribe. The protagonist received 1,000 jungle points. He looked at the hand emitting an aura with a smile on his face. Tian wondered if this was the very skill of supporting the fairy tribe. The attack attributes become almost twice as powerful due to the bonuses from them. The protagonist with a clouded consciousness quickly fell to the ground. The fairies loudly called out to the savior. After a while, the fairies looked down and said loudly that the savior had woken up. Roy pushed them aside and told them to go away and not disturb the savior's peace. She looked at him with a serious expression and told the Lord to rest. Roy said loudly with a determined expression that she had just checked his body. There was a powerful power in him that did not belong to him, and this power was very terrifying. It was destroying his life, and even with all the power of their inhabitants, they could not help him. Tian looked away with a frightened expression and asked loudly, what was she talking about? Roy said with a stern expression that this power was currently manifesting in such a way that it was difficult for it to coexist with him in the same body. Even if he could come to terms with it, it would still drain his life as long as he used it. Tian thought with a tense expression that the power of the Lord of the Jungle was developed using stone tablets. In order to tune into the essence of the jungle world. The protagonist does not want to use it until he is pushed to the edge, fearing unpredictable consequences. Tian thought that the residual will was the biggest problem. It turned out that it was impossible for him. Since the day of devouring is approaching, he must seize all the stone tablets of the company. In the jungle, he has to find 4 more tablets. Perhaps with their help he will be able to eliminate the consequences of the system. Tian said with a smile on his face that she knew he was not the savior. Roy raised her hand menacingly and said that the savior was a legend of her people. She never believed in it. Just now, in the midst of events, she saw his choice, which means that the protagonist is not a bad person. If he can convince the royal family to take control of the powers inside him, then he may be able to defeat the Goblin King. Roy asked him to be their savior. Tian thought with a serious look that if the royal family acknowledged him and helped control his power, then he was ready to do everything for the sake of the fairy tribe. It must be said that this fairy is already very vigilant among monsters. She is still far from being able to resist a human's false strategy. Roy calmly said that she could take him to the palace to Her Majesty. The main thing is that he must promise her that he really wants to save their people. The protagonist looked at her and said loudly that he promises he will do everything in his power to help them defeat the Goblin King. Tian calmly thought that the Goblin King is level 20th. Even if he loses in strength, then with his brains and the help of the fairy tribe, he can handle it. Roy, walking towards the exit, said that he should then go with her. After some time, the headman standing on a stone which said that in each village there is a sign. It leads to the palace, with the help of which they can perform a teleportation array to get to the palace. The blonde fairy looked at the protagonist and said that the village elder is one of the princess's teachers. She often visits the royal palace. Mr. Savior will be able to meet the princess without any problem. Tian thought with a serious expression, which means that this Ray has a huge reputation in the fairy tribe. No wonder she has better brains than these fairies. Roy decisively struck the center of the stone slab with her cane, creating a bright beam rushing into the sky. The fairies, watching what was happening, loudly wished good luck to Mr. Savior. A bright light illuminated the space around, creating streams of smoke. After a while, in the main palace of the Tree Kingdom, they looked forward with serious faces, standing in the teleporter. The fairies looked at the people who appeared in the teleporter and said that this was Ray's grandmother. Why did she use the teleportation array so suddenly? The second fairy asked, did the goblins really invade? Ray looked to the side and told them not to worry. They came here, to Her Highness. The head woman introduced Mr. Savior. The male fairies asked loudly in surprise, was this really Mr. Savior? After some time in the palace, the princess put her hands on her stomach and asked, do they really mean to say that this is Mr. Savior? Ray knelt down, lowered her head and agreed with Her Majesty. She said loudly that Mr. Savior came from the altar and helped them repel the goblin invasion twice already. Tian looked forward with a serious expression and wondered, is this really the fairy princess? The princess folded her hands with a smile on her face and said that they had been waiting for him for decades. Finally, he came to them. The system window notified that his new mission was to win the heart of the fairy princess. The reward for completing 3,000 jungle points. The protagonist was perplexed by the thought, what kind of mission is this to win the heart of the princess? However, the reward for this is very good. Tian put his hand on his chest and bowed and told Her Highness not to worry. He will protect the fairy tribe from external enemies. The protagonist licked his lip and thought that this princess looked quite innocent. It looked like this was another easy 3,000 points for him. The princess raised her hand and turned to Ray and thanked her for sending her a savior. They would thank her for this. The village chief turned to Her Majesty with a serious expression and said that she had some information. The princess happily told Ray not to worry. She would treat the savior well. The door to the room quickly closed. The princess said that Mr. Savior had appeared in this world again to save their people. This was truly a great honor for their fairy tribe. The princess pressed herself against Tian's body and asked how Mr. Savior would like her to repay him. The protagonist, with an embarrassed expression, wondered what was going on here. Was the mission progress bar moving too fast? Tian, quickly falling to the floor, asked what she had done to him. The protagonist fell to the floor without moving. After a while the princess said that he wanted to conquer her. This guy really has ulterior motives. She held the weapon in her hand, looked forward and asked if he was awake. Tian looked at her with a frightened look, lying on the bed tied up. The princess with a determined look brought the blade of the sword to his neck and asked who the hell he was. How did he even get to the kingdom of trees? The protagonist turned to Her Highness and asked what she was talking about. He is their savior. The princess, looking angry, sat on him, raised the weapon to his face and told him to stop talking. She doesn't believe in any savior at all, and he doesn't have to try to deceive her. Tian, with a drop of sweat on his face, thought that it was no wonder that everything went so well at first. Her Highness didn't trust him. The princess, looking terrified, raised the weapon and loudly told him not to think about it. She doesn't think he will confess, so she will just kill him. Tian, with tears in his eyes, raised his head and loudly said that he had something to say. Elder Ray knows where he comes from. The princess can just ask her. She, with an offended face, lowered the blade and asked, does Ray really know? Perhaps she was deceived by him too. The princess is not as stupid as them. The protagonist, with fear on his face, thought that it looks like he won't be able to convince the princess for a long time. So first, he needs to break free. Tian gritted his teeth and quickly tore the rope around his hands. He pushed her down to the floor with a grin on his face and loomed over her. The princess said loudly with a red face that he was a villain. The protagonist said loudly with shame that it was not so. Tian raised his head and used the ability of jungle instincts and thought that it was dangerous. He transformed and quickly jumped aside from the powerful beam of energy. The protagonist confidently slid across the floor and asked if this was really a warrior of the fairy tribe. The princess looked at his body with amazement on her face and loudly told him to wait. Tian said with a smirk on his face that they even call him a villain. He quickly looked at the flow of energy and thought that this was the husband of the fairy queen. Perhaps he specializes in martial arts and has stealth skills similar to his fighting style? Tian ran forward without getting hit. The protagonist thought that he could tell where the enemy was, but the system didn't create a mission. It seemed like there was little point. If he couldn't hurt him, he'd have to make him show himself. He'd have to use the princess as bait first. Tian flew forward at a high speed. A powerful stream of energy hit the protagonist's body. He gritted his teeth and looked at the level 25 fairy king and level 20 fairy queen who had appeared. The queen looked at the princess's hand and asked if she was okay. The king asked with a stern look, was he really the intruder who had invaded the tree kingdom under the guise of a savior? Tian thought with an angry look that this fairy family wouldn't be so easy to fool. He was wrong about this mission. The protagonist ran forward with a confident look and thought that they might not believe him, but the princess was pestering him and wanted to kill him. Now her father, that monster behind him, was chasing him. Tian looked at the energy beams with a determined expression and thought, wasn't it said that fairies weren't good fighters? Why is this guy so good at it? The king flew forward at high speed with a stern expression and said loudly that he was trying to escape secretly. The protagonist underestimated the warriors of the fairy clan. Tian quickly turned to the side and thought that the invisibility skill was completely useless in the face of auxiliary magical creatures. His strength was surprisingly strong. This was definitely not the strength that fairies should have, was it? The protagonist gritted his teeth and crossed his arms to block the king's strike. He flew down quickly, creating streams of smoke, thinking that this was a blessing from the fairy queen. So the power of two level 20 fairies working together. The fairies looked forward with angry expressions, holding weapons in their hands. Tian stood there with a puzzled expression, surrounded by guards with spears, and thought, where is Grandma Ray? Why didn't she explain everything when she brought him here? The king, floating in the air, loudly ordered to detain the intruder. The protagonist, with a confident look, spread his legs apart, and put his hands on them. He thought that it seemed like it would be difficult to get out of here today without showing real strength. Tian looked at the king and thought that since this was the case, he would have to rely only on strength to get out. He quickly headed towards the king, creating a powerful flow of energy. The king, with a yellow aura in his eyes, flew forward without getting hit. He stood in front of the door with an ominous look and asked if the invader still wanted to escape. The protagonist, kneeling on one knee, coughed loudly and thought that even despite this, the assessment of his strength as level 20 was wrong, he was stronger. A blue portal opened in the air. The pink-haired fairy came out of the portal and asked if his strength was great. She restored his strength. The king looked forward with a serious look and said that compared to the Goblin King's strength, it was not enough. Tian, with a frightened look, thought that the king also had the support of health restoration. These are cheats, aren't they? The system window notifies that a system fragment has been detected. The system has asked him to come quickly and activate it. This will unlock new features from the Jungle Lord system. A fragment of the system. The forest system was developed and completed by him with the help of the one who obtained the origins of this world. The main character, looking at the system window, wondered if one of the 4 stone slabs that had not yet been found was really here. Tian flew up quickly and the king, with a serious look, flew after him, loudly calling out to the invader. The king, looking up, thought that this direction did not lead to the exit from the palace, but to the forbidden territory of the royal family. Tian looked ahead in amazement, and wondered if this was really the Mia stone slab. Could one of the slabs really be here? Did everything just coincide? He doesn't think that he will find the first Mia stone slab, which he had been looking for a long time, in this forest. Although no matter how hard he tried, he could not find it. The king, running rapidly along the tree, thought, it turns out that his goal is the same as that of the Goblin King. Is this also the legacy of the great prophet? This place is protected by a strong magical barrier. The king will see how Tian copes with this. The protagonist entered the light portal. The king looked at him in surprise and thought that the magical barrier could not stop him. Tian, with a smile on his face, extended his hand to the blue plate. The system window, congratulating the owner, notifies that he touched a fragment of the system. Tian unlocked the B-rank skill panel, gained access and returned to the jungle temple. The protagonist, looking around, thought, is the jungle temple really the power of the Lord of the Jungle? There is an empty hall here, but what is its function? The system window notifies that as the ruler of the jungle, outside of combat conditions, he can voluntarily transfer his spirit to the temple. There, his strength and energy will quickly recover, eliminating all negative states. Tian put his hand on his chin with a thoughtful look and looked at the system window. He thought that this is a trap for restoring health, and only the spirit can enter, while the body remains outside. It cannot be used during combat, otherwise he will not have time to recover and can be killed. There is also a rank B skill panel. He is interested in what new abilities he has received. The system window notifies that there is access to 3 skills in the rank B skill panel. Energy costs have been reduced. The Seeker skill, its action is 800 meters. The Golden Step skill briefly increases movement speed by 50%. The recovery time is 60 seconds. The B-level skill minions, the souls of previously attacked strong enemies, will be enclosed in an egg nest. Through the hatching process, they will be reborn as his minions. Tian extended a finger with a smirk on his face and thought that ordinary skills can still be understood. If this advanced skill can turn slain enemies into his servants, then he can create an entire army. He should definitely try it. The protagonist stood in the smoke and pressed the system window with his finger. He entered the room and thought, if all these creatures were killed by him, would the nest be able to raise these elite monsters? The system window notifies that he must choose a soul egg to become his servant. Tian calmly rubbed his chin and thought, is it really impossible to choose them all? The system window notifies that his current jungle points are not enough to unlock all the soul eggs. The protagonist thought that he really won't get anything for free. He needs to use jungle points to unlock, but it seems there is no other way. Tian thought that he will start with the strongest one then. He loudly said for Feng to become his servant. The system window notifies that by spending 1,200 points, one can get 1 soul egg. It will create a servant according to the master's wishes. The remaining jungle points are 400. Tian looked at the egg with a thoughtful expression and thought that just unlocking one requires 1,200 points. With this, you can get a B-rank attack skill. The increase in battle stamina is also worth it. The protagonist confidently extended his hand forward and said loudly that now his servant should appear in front of him. The system window notified that affiliation, incubation. The egg shell was rapidly disintegrating into many pieces. Tian, with a sly grin on his face, thought that it was possible to feel that he had complete control over foam. His strength was the same as in life, but he lacked the previous equipment. Foam, kneeling on one knee, said that since this is the will of the master. The protagonist confidently smiled and thought that with the bonus to combat power from his new servant, there was no need to worry about the fairy outside anymore. This path to strengthening is increasingly reminiscent of turning into a monster. There is no time for research now. First he needs to deal with the problem outside. At the same time, he needs to check the servant's strength. After a while, Tian put his hand on the stove. He looked back and said loudly that he was back. It seems that that monster did not take the chance to attack him. The fairies with smiles on their faces said loudly that their clan had been waiting for a whole century. They finally returned their prophet savior. The protagonist with a confident look raised his hand and quickly looking forward laughed loudly and said that he had become a savior again. After some time, in a building under a dark sky, there were mugs on the table. The king with a smile on his face holding a mug in his hand said loudly that the prophet was not only incredibly strong, but also his endurance to alcohol was enormous. Tian with a red face pouring the contents of the mug into his mouth loudly told him to continue drinking. The protagonist drinking the drink thought that this alcohol produced by the fairy clan tasted almost like human beer. They still hoped to get him drunk. The king with red cheeks loudly apologized to the prophet for his lack of culture. Tian with a smile on his face said that in fact, the princess was right. He really was not a prophet or a savior. The protagonist thought that he had almost won the trust of the fairy clan. So getting rid of this false title of savior will be even easier. The king stood up from the table, leaning his hands on it, and said that in fact, even before meeting him, Ray had already told them about the situation. She said that the protagonist was not some kind of prophet at all. Tian looked at him in bewilderment, and thought that he was an outsider after all. The king would hardly go to war with the sacred clan for his sake. So the previous fight was just a test. The king, warming his hand, said that it was not that he did not believe Ray's judgments about him, but he was also a martial arts lover. In this forest, it was almost impossible to meet a worthy opponent for a fight. So he wanted to test his skills with Tian. The protagonist, with a drop of sweat on his face, looked at the king and thought that a martial arts lover was indeed a rare case among the fairy clan. They quickly looked at the stream of smoke coming from the table. The protagonist, putting his hands on the table, asked if it was true that they had already recognized him as that savior. The fairy queen looked at the king lying on the floor and agreed with him. She said that until now they had treated him as an outsider who needed the clan's help. The old man wanted to test Tian's strength to see if he could help them. They didn't expect the protagonist to immediately receive recognition from the prophet's relic, the stone tablet. This confirmed his identity. The protagonist, with a drop of sweat on his face, thought, what does this mean? It's related to the Mia tablet after all. He went against the prophet's relic. Could this Mia tablet really be what the prophet they were talking about left behind? Tian, with a smile on his face, asked that since they had recognized him as the prophet's savior, could he learn more about their prophet and this tablet? The queen said that the prophet had once opened this refuge among the forest for them and left this tablet here. He also left a prophecy, after which he left them. When their clan is in trouble, he will return again. The thing he left behind will respond to his call. The protagonist put his hand on his chin with an interested look and said that now it is clear why they consider him to be the reincarnation of a prophet. This prophet sounds as if some religious gods appeared in human history. The origin of the Mia slab is also a matter that the company has been studying for a long time. They did not expect to find a clue here. His understanding of this matter is still too superficial. Tian asked, did the slab not react to them in any way? The queen put her hands on the table and said that it did not react. There are prohibitions around the slab, left by the previous prophet. They cannot even get close. Besides, he is not the first stranger to come for the slab. The protagonist asked loudly in surprise, are there really others who are looking for the slab? He wondered, are other human heroes or their troops also looking for secret slabs? The queen said with a stern look that it is the Goblin King. Tian looked forward with a frightened expression and asked, does she mean that the Goblin King entered here from behind the slab? The queen looked down and said that in recent years, their kind has become accustomed to living within the forest realm. Therefore, all 7 altar passages leading here have long been sealed by them. Only a few decades ago, her husband, in order to confirm this path, opened the altar to go into the forest and challenge the other people. Tian, with beads of sweat on his face, thought that all the fairies challenged the other people. This king seems to be a really big fan of martial arts. The queen said that therefore, the only altar that can enter the forest world belongs to the royal family. Only their fairy people can enter and exit from there. A few years ago, for some reason, the Goblin King entered. At first, they thought that he came along with the one when the great prophet was teaching. Although his subordinates were behaving violently in the forest world, they did not stop them and allowed them to visit the stone tablet. However, the tablet did not respond to him, but on the contrary, seriously injured him, almost to death. On the threshold of death, he used dark magic to absorb the life forces of several fairy court girls, restoring himself. Tian tensely rubbed his chin with his hand and thought that using magic to suck out lives. This is not typical for creatures like the Goblin King. It seems that he is very special. The queen closed her eyes, folded her hands and said that when they saw that the tablet did not accept him and he began to threaten the lives of their people, they realized that he was not the reincarnation of the prophet. They immediately entered into battle with him. The protagonist asked, could the queen and the king even together not defeat him? The queen said that in the forest of spirits she met many monsters of the Goblin King's level, but she cannot say that the battle was completely lost. However, the strength of this forest Goblin King really surpassed their level. Tian asked with a puzzled look, is he really that strong? He thought that this meant that the Goblin King's strength far exceeded his expectations, and he also had magical power. If that was the case, then he should send someone to thoroughly investigate. The queen of the forest raised her hand and said that at that time, he defeated her and her husband, but did not kill them. However, he demanded that they serve him. Then he captured the altar and ordered them to open all the altars in the forest. They moved his entire race into the forest and allowed them to occupy part of the territory. The protagonist wondered with an interested look, are they saying that he was able to enter the forest only because of the Goblin King's will? Tian quickly looked forward with his hand on the table and said that he believed they heard from the elder that he came here for one purpose. He has inner strength, and if he can get the princess's help, then in alliance with the king and queen, there might be a chance to defeat the Goblin King. He thought with a smirk on his face that if their favor towards him is great enough, he can request a purification ceremony. If the protagonist can get the support of the sea and their help in purification, it will free up strength to strike at the Goblin King. The princess slammed the table with great force and loudly refused him. Tian asked in surprise, why is that? The princess puffed out her cheeks with anger and said loudly that no means no. The protagonist looked at her in amazement and said that this might be a chance to defeat the Goblin King. Does the princess really not trust him? She said loudly with anger on her face that there is no reason. The queen put her hands on her shoulders and said that it is not that she does not want to perform the purification ceremony for him. Because a fairy can only perform purification once in her life. Usually this ceremony is done for a partner. The princess said that it is true, fairies can only do the purification once in their lifetime. Usually it symbolizes a promise in the fairy clan to be together for life. In any case, she does not believe in prophets or saviors and would never do the ceremony for a stranger. So, in order to accept the purification ceremony, he needs to become a member of the fairy clan. Lin Tian said that he did not mind being a member of their clan, but the princess did not seem to like it. Suddenly, a warrior from the fairy clan ran into the hall and loudly called out to Her Majesty. He knelt down and said loudly that the Goblin King was breaking through the protective spells and was heading to the palace. They had made a pact not to violate each other's boundaries until the moon baptized them, but now they broke the pact because they knew that she might baptize already. The king walked up to the table and said that he might have learned of the prophet's presence. Lin Tian turned around and calmly asked how long it would take the Goblin King to approach the palace. The queen said that after making the pact, the king took his clan to the edge of the tree kingdom, and she spent the night with the elders of her clan, casting spells. It would take the Goblin King a few more days to break through the layers of spells and reach the palace. Lin Tian calmly told His Majesty that he understood the clan's traditions, but in the interest of expediency. Now that their race was facing the dilemma of being invaded, he wondered if they could throw those traditions aside for the time being. The queen looked at him calmly and told the prophet that he could continue. Lin Tian said that he would like to be baptized by the princess so that he and His Highness could defeat the Goblin King together, so that there would no longer be any bonds between them and the princess would not have to honor the oath of partnership. He thought that it was currently very difficult to raise the little princess's favorability level, so he needed to complete the baptism first, and then complete the favor quest or not. It was just a matter of points whether he needed it at all. The queen said that the baptism of the fairy clan required a spiritual connection, which may or may not work, but it was something to try as a last resort. She turned around, called out to Ying and asked if she would do it. The princess said with a dissatisfied look that if it was what this guy said, she was willing to give it a try. He could consider it retribution for the mistakes she had made. Lin Tian thought with a smile that this would completely release the monster's willpower. Together with the power of Luo Foam, the queen and the king of the fairies, they would be able to defeat him. After a while, the fairies who were in the castle hall asked, could this be the reincarnation of the prophet? She heard that there would be a ceremony to get closer to the princess. Would the princess really baptize him? Lin Tian walked in looking very anxious because of the atmosphere in this place. Ying, who was wearing a wedding dress, asked with a dissatisfied look, why did she have to dress like this? It was just a formality. The fairies who were watching this with happy faces said that it was a real wedding ceremony. Ying stood in front of Lin Tian and asked her mother with a dissatisfied expression, can they begin already? The queen standing between them told the princess that in the presence of the great prophet, she was going to baptize the prophet's reincarnation, His Excellency Lin Tian, in front of her from now on. She didn't have time to finish because Ying said loudly that she should just skip this part and get down to business. The queen was confused by this and said that they could begin the baptism magic then. Several fairies stood around Lin Tian, created a magic circle, and he asked, has the baptism of the fairies officially begun? Ying flew up and a warm light began to emanate from her. He blushed and said that because of this baptism ceremony, it was as if a warm stream was enveloping him. Fragments of Ying's memories began to appear in his mind, who said that she was praying for the prophet, the savior, to appear before her. Lin Tian closed his eyes and thought that this was the little princess's memory. Other fragments of memories also appeared and he thought that this was this guy's memory. The elder noticed that Lin Tian and Ying were emitting different energies, and she said that it was not good that they did not have mutual feelings of love. They both started to have a severe headache, and the elder said that this way the baptism ceremony might fail. Lin Tian released a very strong stream of energy that sent Ying flying. The king standing next to him was able to catch his daughter. He fell to his knees because of what had happened, raised his head and asked what just happened. Ying said that they had failed. She knew that it would not be that easy. The queen turned around and said that in that case, this was the fate of the fairies. They should take the princess to rest first. Lin Tian looked at his hand and said that he could not believe that it had failed. The king walked up to him, put his hand on his shoulder, and told the prophet that he shouldn't worry. This was to be expected. Baptism is not a simple ceremony. It requires a cordial relationship between two people. In order to complete the baptism ceremony, there must be complete agreement and understanding between them, and Ying was still indifferent to him. Therefore, he cannot perform the baptism and is not destined to be the prophet who will save them. The prophet then led them to the tree kingdom to save their clan, giving them a chance to survive, believing the fairies uncompetitive in the cruel jungle, which led to the goblin invasion today. Now the person representing the prophets will appear again. Lin Tian looked at them with a puzzled expression, and the queen said that perhaps there was another interpretation of their clan's salvation. She knelt down with the king and said that she asked him to be the one to lead the princess and the rest of the tribe back to the jungle. Lin Tian looked at them and asked, he will lead the princess and their people out of the tree kingdom, but what about them? The queen said with a serious look that she and her husband will activate the spells in the tree kingdom and meet the goblin king. They will die together. Lin Tian refused and said that this cannot be done. He will not take their clan and leave this place, leaving them to fight the enemy alone. This plan is absolutely impossible. The king raised his head and said that they have discussed this before. First letting the enemy in and then retreat is no longer an option. The queen said that, however, she believes that with their leadership and strategy, they can survive this battle with the goblins. Lin Tian said that they should not rush. Perhaps they have another way. By leading the fairy clan back to the jungle and becoming their new king, it seems like he will have accomplished his mission to save the fairy clan and won't have to fight the goblin king. But he is not satisfied with this plan. However, he is afraid that this goblin king has no way to know the secret of the stone tablet, so he must defeat him and make him his subordinate. The king looked at him with a serious expression and asked what he had come up with. Lin Tian asked with a smile, if he gets the princess's approval, He will be christened, right? The love project is officially launched. Sometime later, in the fairy clan's domain, Ying was sitting on the swing with a very dissatisfied look. She opened her eyes and was very surprised when she saw petals flying nearby. Lin Tian, holding a flower in his hand, asked Her Highness, why is she here alone? Did something happen, or is she upset about something? Ying looked at him with a very dissatisfied face and called him a traitor. Lin Tian was embarrassed by this and wondered why the likability score had dropped again. It was okay, he didn't expect this dramatic scenario trick to actually work in the first place. He sat down next to her on the swing and the king, who was watching from the side, asked, is this the method he was talking about? Will it really work? The queen said with a smile that she thought it was romantic. It seemed like he was no longer as loyal to the prophet as before. Ying took the dagger in her hand and said with an evil look that he could deceive her parents. But he couldn't deceive her. No matter what happened, she would never trust a stranger again. Lin Tian told Her Highness that although he was not a great savior, he was definitely not a villain. She put away the dagger and said that the purification ritual had already failed. Even if he was some kind of savior, he didn't have that kind of power now. Lin Tian asked with a serious expression, how would one know if there was such a power if one didn't try? She was surprised because of this and asked this traitor, what did he mean by that? Suddenly, a loud sound was heard after that. After a while, the queen asked how the preparations for the ritual were going. The elder said that all the units were already in place. They could leave the forest at any time. The prophet had already gone to talk to the princess. Maybe they can complete the baptism ceremony. The king said that even if the ceremony was successful, it didn't matter whether they could tame the princess or not. They didn't want to support the goblins. They would leave these two to solve this trouble. A warrior ran into the hall and said loudly that something bad had happened. The Lord Prophet took the princess with him, used a teleportation spell and entered the goblin territory. The king was very indignant about this and asked loudly, what did he just say? At the same time, Ying, dissatisfied with what had happened, said loudly that he really seemed to be a dishonest person. What did he really want? Lin Tian, with a calm expression, motioned for her to be quiet. He looked down and said that this was the goblin territory. No matter what she thought, it was none of his business. Ying was very scared by this and asked, what did he really want? Didn't he say that he should try his hand? Lin Tian looked at her with a smile and thought that it turned out that this princess also had her own fears. In order to gain her absolute trust and favor, he first needed to earn it. At the same time, he wanted to test how strong this goblin king was. He stood up and said that everyone was talking about how powerful the goblin king was. He needed to see his strength with his own eyes. A system window appeared in front of him, saying that he had been given the task of killing the second goblin general. The reward for completing it was 1,000 points. Lin Tian smiled and thought that these 1,000 points would allow him to obtain a B-level skill or choose another assistant. Ying took his hand and said that she believed that he was not an easy person. She also felt that it was very dangerous here. Lin Tian turned to her and said that she did not need to worry. He was in no hurry to test his strength himself. He snapped his fingers and said that then let his servant go out first. After that, a blue egg appeared in front of him and Ying was surprised and asked, so he also has a servant? Lin Tian thought that he could once easily defeat a level 15 goblin king, but after becoming his subordinate, it was unknown whether he still had such strength. He raised his hand and said that he should go and show him what he can do. His servant must show his strength. Luo Feng came out of that egg and seriously agreed with his master. After a while, the goblins looked at Luo Feng fighting against the second general. He jumped aside and asked, so he is the one who invaded the forest kingdom? At the same time, Lin Tian closed his eyes and thought that he understood everything now. Although he was fighting through a subordinate, his own energy and stamina were being used up. It seemed that if he took damage, he would also be partially harmed. At the same time, he feels that he can completely control his subordinate, including his vision, hearing, and even memory. However, now his subordinate's strength is no longer as strong as before. At the same time, Luo Feng was holding back the goblin's attack with his axe. Lin Tian looked at this with a thoughtful expression and thought that he had been fighting for so long and still had not seen the Goblin King. Hadn't he made enough noise? He began to get up and said that since that was the case, he would try to deal with it himself. Ying was surprised by this and asked what he was going to do. A helmet appeared on Lin Tian's face, and he said with a smile that of course he was going to kill him. He jumped off a very high cliff and said that she should wait for him here. Luo Feng sensed something, and because of it, his eye began to emit energy. He deflected the goblin general's attack with a sharp movement of his hand. Immediately after that, he started to run away, and the goblin loudly said that he would not let him escape. After that, he ran after him and Luo Feng ran to the cliff. The goblin general looked at him with a smile and asked, did he really drive himself into a dead end? Suddenly, Luo Feng turned to him and abruptly threw an axe towards him. The goblin general immediately noticed this and parried it with his axe and did not notice that Lin Tian had landed behind him. He ran towards him at high speed and cut off the head of this monster with one blow. The system notified that he had defeated the goblin general and received 1,000 jungle points. Lin Tian picked up the crystal from the ground and asked, those military men moved these crystals, but what were they planning? These jungle runes, created for spells, and they are capable of this? His jungle instinct skill was suddenly activated. Immediately after, Luo Feng was attacked by a strong energy and part of his body was blown off. This explosion hit Lin Tian and he was thrown to the side. He sat up and thought, so he was discovered? The system notified that his presence was detected by the enemy. He must defeat the advancing enemy. Lin Tian decided to use the echolocation skill and thought that he could not see where the enemy was. He needed to find out. He used this skill and thought that there were a lot of crystals, so they were going to seal the tree kingdom. He noticed the silhouette and thought, so this is the Goblin King? He is completely different from the goblins he saw before. The system notified that the Goblin King is the final goal of the quest. The reward for defeating him is 10,000 jungle points. But it is very dangerous. Suddenly, the Goblin King opened his eyes and released a very strong aura. Lin Tian felt a very strong pressure because of this and was very surprised. After that, a very strong explosion occurred and Ying was surprised and asked loudly, was this guy caught? She looked at the many explosions that were happening in the forest and said with a worried look that this guy can't die here. She turned away and asked, why should she even worry about this guy? She should leave here right now. She grabbed her head and said with a worried look that if he died here, she wouldn't be able to tell her parents about it. Immediately after that, Lin Tian quickly landed next to her. Ying asked with a surprised look, is he okay? He said loudly with a very worried look that the Goblin King is coming after them, so they should escape from here. They used the teleportation circle and the Goblin King didn't have time to catch it. He noticed the disappearing magic circle and asked, were they escaped? He picked up the crystal fragment lying on the ground and said in surprise that this was the power of the jungle stone slab. After that, a magic circle appeared in the royal fairy palace, and Lin Tian and the princess fell out of it. The queen and the king noticed them and asked loudly with a worried look, are they okay? He looked at them and said that he just wanted to know how strong the enemy really was. As expected, the king was right. This monster was really strong. The king said with a dissatisfied look that he was too brave to take the princess to such a dangerous place. Suddenly, Lin Tian was bound by strong dark energy and fell to the ground in pain. Ying was surprised by this and loudly asked the prophet what happened to him. The queen examined him and calmly said that this was the Goblin King's destruction magic. Ying was very worried about this and loudly asked what they should do now. Wings of energy appeared behind the queen. She created a magic circle and said that she didn't have to worry because she could get rid of it. The king said with a serious expression, however, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to recover from such an injury within half a month. Lin Tian lost consciousness and found himself in the jungle hall. He stood alone in the great hall and thought that this time the injury was serious, and the Goblin King really used magic. He looked at the crystal he took earlier and said that however, all this was not in vain, because he took this with him. This is indeed a crystal for creating spells. There are jungle inscriptions and magic symbols on it. This is not something the Goblin King can do. It seems that this monster has really undergone some kind of transformation. Looking at how it looked, it seemed like it was making weapons. By the way, when he activated this magic formation, Luo Feng was directly blown away. But can he summon it again? The system notified that his subordinate had been killed and returned to the soul cocoon. In order to summon them again, he had to wait for the cooldown. Lin Tian looked at this cocoon with a thoughtful expression and thought that it seemed that once a subordinate was killed, he could not be summoned again for some time. By the way, he seemed to be able to read the memories of his subordinates, so maybe he could do the same with the two goblin generals. He snapped his fingers and two soul cocoons appeared in front of him. He put his hand on one of these cocoons and said that he didn't know if this would work. He needed to extract the memories from the goblin generals. The system notified that the last memories were being extracted. He must pay attention to the fact that this operation will consume 400 jungle points. Lin Tian closed his eyes with a dissatisfied look and asked, "Isn't it too expensive?" Although it doesn't matter, after all, he still needs to do it. He began to see the memories of the goblins, in which their kings sat in the center of the magic circle, and the goblins asked why he needed so many stones. The king ordered to create a weapon that can break the spells in the tree kingdom, otherwise the two fairies will try to fight and trap them. He doesn't know what kind of weapon can be made from these stones. He feels like the king has become more and more strange since he escaped from the magical Dragon Valley. He is becoming more and more strange. After all, he used to use axes, but now he doesn't. They shouldn't talk. After all, the ceremony is about to begin. Suddenly, a very strong pulse of dark energy occurred and the system notified that he did not have enough jungle points. The memory search was finished. Lin Tian was very surprised by this and looked at the cocoon in front of him with a puzzled look. He touched another cocoon and a system window appeared in front of him, saying that he did not have enough jungle points. Lin Tian was very angry about this and began to kick that cocoon. When he calmed down, he thought about Ying and the Goblin King. He thought that the staff in his hand, if the goblin's memories were not exaggerated, it contained magic that could destroy the spells of the tree realm. It was a very powerful weapon. The system reminded the owner that the mission to save the fairy clan was coming to an end. Lin Tian was very surprised by this and wondered what was going on. Did the mission fail? He was surprised at how quickly everything was healing here. He needed to go back there and see how the work on his love project was progressing. After a while, Lin Tian woke up and was very surprised when he saw Ying lying next to him and asked loudly, "What is going on here?" An elder looked in and asked the prophet, "Has he really woken up?" He pointed at the princess with a very surprised look and asked, "What is going on here?" She said that as he saw, the queen ordered them to follow him and return to the jungle. She and the king both went to meet the Goblin King themselves. Lin Tian grabbed his head and said, "It seems the war has already begun." How long had he been sleeping anyway? The elder turned around and said that it had only been a day, but the queen said that with his injuries, he would need at least 7 days of rest before he came to his senses. Lin Tian said that as she saw, he needed less time. He turned to the sleeping Ying and asked, "What happened to the princess?" The elder said that the queen hypnotized her highness in case she refused. Lin Tian looked at her and thought that it seemed like the queen really wanted to entrust him with the princess and the entire fairy clan. However, she expected that she could use the tree kingdom to lure the goblins into a trap. But the Goblin King developed a new weapon, the crystal staff, which might actually be able to destroy the tree kingdom into pieces, including the jungle stone tablet. Even if he is on the sidelines, at best he will fail in his mission, and the princess still fell into his hands. But he hasn't found out where the second stone tablet is yet, and the clue to the next one is with the Goblin King. And the most important thing is that he simply lost and ran away. A helmet appeared on his head and he said that he didn't like it very much. The elder turned to him and called him a prophet with a surprised look. Lin Tian stood up and said that he still had a chance to save the fairy clan. At the same time, in the fairy palace, the defeated fairy king and queen were on their knees and the Goblin King said that in a few months he would be stronger than ever. This was the magic of sacrifice, the power that came from sacrificing lives like his. If he kept his promise to christen him, the fairies would be able to live here and would give him the jungle stone slab. The fairy king looked at him with a displeased look and said that the princess had left the tree kingdom, so if he wanted him to christen him, he would have to find her. The queen calmly called Will and said that it was their time to die. They stood up and began to cast a spell and the king said that they had to do this for the future of their people. The Goblin King noticed the spell above his head and asked if he was going to use the power of the tree kingdom to trap him. He knew he would. He started using magic with his staff and said that unfortunately for them, he was ready for it. He fired several beams of dark energy into the sky and was able to destroy the spell they were about to use. The fairy queen was shocked by what happened and said that his power was actually able to destroy the spell left by the prophet. The Goblin King walked on, ignoring them and told these insignificant inhabitants of the jungle that this power actually belongs to him. Finally, he was able to see the stone tablet of the jungle again. Just by touching it, he was enlightened to the secrets of the world and begs to be granted greatness again. Lin Tian was able to cut off his arm with a very fast attack and loudly said that it was a good try. The goblins standing nearby were very surprised by what happened and loudly called out for their king. Lin Tian got into a fighting stance and said that he should remove his pathetic arm from the stone tablet. He struck a very strong blow, but the king blocked it with a magic barrier. He slipped a few meters due to this attack, restored his arm with magic, and said that it was him, the one who had the power of the jungle stone tablet, the same as him. Lin Tian showed him the middle finger with a dissatisfied look and asked, "Is he so proud of having the power of the stone tablet? Is he afraid that the stone tablet will not recognize his power?" The fairy king looked at him and asked why he decided to come back. Lin Tian stood with his back to them and said that they would not be able to protect the clan and the princess. He will say it plainly, he did not come back here to save them. He is a person who does everything for his own benefit. The Goblin King pointed his finger at him with a wide smile and said that he managed to interest him, so he should let him know what secrets he was hiding. Lin Tian used his echolocation skill to spot the goblins that were trying to attack him and asked, did they want to make a surprise attack? Those goblins swung their axes at the same time, but Lin Tian passed by them with surprising speed. He used poison on his weapon and left one wound on each of those goblins' bodies. The system announced that with echolocation, even if he couldn't see with his eyes, he could still accurately hit the opponent's vital organs with poison. He defeated 2 goblin generals to make progress in saving the fairy clan and gained 1,800 jungle points. Lin Tian raised his hand with a sly smile and said that he shouldn't let those pawns interfere with their fight. He thought that, however, he would be happy to gain additional points. The Goblin King smiled and said that he would do as he asked. Immediately after, he began to emit very strong energy with the same smile. He raised his staff and released a beam of this energy, but Lin Tian managed to jump aside. He raised his head and noticed a weak goblin who was about to attack him with his weapon. He wondered with a dissatisfied look, were there no more general-level monsters that could give him jungle points? He was surprised when the Fairy King knocked this goblin away with a blow of his hand. He looked at the goblin standing nearby and said to the prophet that although he did not know why he came back, but if he made such a decision, he should think of a way to defeat him. The queen stood next to her husband and said that they would take care of these monsters. Lin Tian looked at them and thought that he had a way to defeat him, so he would try to do so. He turned to the Goblin King and saw that he had already released several beams of energy at him. Lin Tian immediately got into a fighting stance and ran towards him with great speed. Running close enough, he struck with his hands and broke his beads. The Goblin King did not receive any damage from this attack and swung his staff. He struck very hard, but Lin Tian jumped aside at the last moment. He thought that they still had not returned. Could it be that he made a mistake when he bet on them and the mission will fail because of this? He used the echolocation skill, saw several silhouettes, and realized that they had returned. Unexpectedly for him, the Goblin King grabbed his head and lifted him off the ground. He slammed his head on the ground very hard and said loudly that he caught him. Could it be that this is the one they called the Savior Prophet? This is just a weak praying mantis that will never get stronger, and will die in the jungle. Lin Tian slowly started to get up and said that he was right, there was no savior, he was just a monster from the jungle. Besides, he had nothing to do with saving the fairy race to begin with. He was only trying to gain power, and he needed their help. He had to find the jungle stone tablet. Only with the power of these tablets could he become even more powerful. He clenched his teeth in anger, and said that he needed to defeat his enemies, the monsters that were more terrifying than the jungle itself. Those who oppressed him, those who betrayed him, he wanted to destroy these monsters. Lin Tian stood up and said loudly that they were his true rivals. He swung his hand, into which he channeled energy, and said loudly that the fairies were no different from others, no one could save them. They only pray for a savior, but did not resist themselves. He began to channel his energy into the Goblin King, who looked at it with a surprised look. A smile appeared on his face, and he said that in the jungle, weakness is a sin. He should rest for his sins. He grabbed his hand and dispersed all his energy with a smile. The Goblin King began to laugh loudly with a wide smile, and said that this is real power. With this power, he will be able to return to the Demon Dragon Valley and capture it again. He did not have time to finish because Ai Ying flew next to him and snatched Lin Tian from his grip. She landed next to the other elves and said that the prophet was right. They were too weak and continued to pray for a savior, when the only one who could save them was themselves. The Goblin King looked at them with a calm look and asked, "Are they sure they want to fight?" Will released a very strong energy and resolutely said loudly that they should bless him, and they will fight. The Goblin King was annoyed by this, and said with a smile that in that case he would kill them all. Will ran towards him, swung his fist and asked loudly if he wanted to see the fairy clan's martial arts with his own eyes.